What is going on? I am Jordan Elliott from 49ers Goldmine, and I'm here with Brad Graham from the SFNiners. What is going on, Brad? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Ready to talk some draft, take some questions, see where it leads us.
So, obviously, the big news the last couple of days has been the pro days. Mac Jones had his pro day. Justin Fields had his pro day. Trey Lance had his pro day a little bit back, but it came out that Kyle didn't want a heavy 49ers presence there because they were trying to keep their cards close to the vest and didn't really want to tip their hand as to what they were doing with the trade up. But it's obviously very evident now that the 49ers are in a position where they are targeting. I mean, it was pretty much assumed. We all kind of knew that it was going to be a quarterback at 3, but they've all but confirmed that. So the whole focus of tonight is going to be we're going to discuss the quarterback, some things we like, maybe don't like. And then if anybody has any questions or if there's any topics or concerns or something that they may have noticed about the quarterbacks that they'd like to bring up in the discussion, please put it in the comments, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But again, we're just here having fun, talking quarterbacks, talking 49ers. It doesn't necessarily have to be just about the quarterbacks. If there's another draft crush or another player you really like, there are other positions on a football team. I know we've all been kind of enamored.
There are?
But yeah, there's other areas they could address too, and they do still have 8 other draft picks other than that number 3 spot. So we could start with this one. This is a really good start. Do you really think that Kyle is going to draft Mac Jones? And I'll start. I think that you can't rule it out at this point. And here's why I'm saying that. Because I think Mac Jones, as much as he has this, kind of joking persona going around about his dad bod and his beer belly and all these, he's not this great athlete. I think that there's so much more to playing quarterback than just being this phenomenal athlete. And we've been stuck in this mold lately where and I'm guilty of it too. We watch Patrick Mahomes, we watch Josh Allen, we watch Russell Wilson, we watch these guys that really can buy time out of the pocket. They can attack teams with their legs. They can do all these extra things that typically your traditional pocket passer can't do. But ultimately, all those guys not only have that, but they also have good processing ability. It may not be elite Peyton Manning level, galaxy brain type stuff, but they all are competent processors and field readers. And that to me is always going to be the most important thing. And while his pro day may not have been very impressive, watching him, pop his shirt off and having that gut hang out may not have been very impressive. Watching the amount of tape that I've watched on Mac Jones, I can see how a team would be enamored with his ability to go from read to read and go from a certain area of the field that may be closed and not break down, not give up on a play while still maintaining some composure in the pocket. So do I think he's going to draft Mac Jones? No. And the reason why I would say no is because their whole thing has been that they want to keep Jimmy G this year. And it's coming out today that they're only going to move him if they can get a first, which, if John Lynch can get a first back for him, extend him for life, because you're just like, that's unheard of for a guy that's missed 2 out of the last 3 years. So, but my whole thinking is that if you're going to keep Jimmy and you want to get a guy that's going to sit behind him for a year, you could have hypothetically taken Davis Mills, who, while he may not be as good as Mac Jones right now, you may not see him in the same light. He has arguably better traits, and if you're going to have that timeline of having him sit, I just don't see the logic of moving up, mortgaging 3 first-round picks for Mac Jones when you could have sat back and taken Davis Mills. It makes far more sense, in my opinion, to take a Trey Lance, to take a Justin Fields, one of these guys that you can really sit and groom and have them, if that really is the plan, which for all we know, that might not be their plan at all. They might plan on starting the rookie from day one. So I don't think he is, but we can't rule it out is basically my point. I'll let Brad, get in here too, but I wouldn't count on it, but don't be surprised if it happens, if that makes sense.
And I think you're 100% correct. Essentially, that's where the name Mayo Mac originated from, because he's just very plain and vanilla, right? But plain and vanilla in the NFL, when done correctly, wins football games. It really does. You play complementary football. You make sure that you're not turning over the ball. You're making your proper reads. You're doing everything you need to do pre-snap. That's what he does. He's a good processor. He has the ability to be accurate with touch and anticipatory throws, all that kind of stuff that you want in your quarterbacks to be successful in the NFL. The problem is that he doesn't wow you with the intangibles. He doesn't wow you with his measurables. And when you leverage the future to move up to pick 3, and with the way the league is trending towards these new style quarterbacks that can do a little bit of everything, the athleticism is off the charts. It's hard not to want those guys, especially when we're staring four other QBs in the face that are legit and have all the tools and everything you want. Plus, you could argue they have the processing as well. Is it as good as Mac Jones? That's debatable. But my opinion is Kyle's been attached to this type of archetype player with Kirk Cousins, Brian Hoyer, what have you. I think he wants to get away from that. Could he draft Mac Jones? He absolutely could. Do I think that's what he does? No, I don't. And I think I feel confident in saying that based on his press conference talking about his relation to Kirk Cousins and seemed to be fired up that he had to answer that question yet again. So I don't think it's Mac Jones. I think it is a possibility. I think if it happened, I could make sense of it. But just based on where it's trending, I really, really hope that that's not the pick because I want to see Kyle Shanahan's scheme unlocked.
Yeah, I agree. And, we could parlay it into this too, because I know the other big name right now is Justin Fields. I think that it's just a situation where you see a guy who's so much more physically gifted, and you really think about if the health is obviously a big thing, right? Like health is very important, and that if Jimmy was healthy, maybe they aren't this eager to move up and get a guy. But you have to think that there is a level of we've seen what Jimmy can do as a pocket passer with a quick release, who's at least competent enough to get the ball out to a lot of these reads at a reasonable rate. You'd like to think if they're going to give up that kind of capital, it's like, well, we've seen the ceiling of what it could look like with a guy like Jimmy. And I'm not saying that Mac Jones is Jimmy. I think they're a lot different for a lot of reasons, but we've seen what a non-really athletic quarterback can kind of cap this offense off at. Let's see what it looks like with a guy that can extend plays. So then we'll get into this about the work ethic. I'm not going to take that when people quote unnamed sources. I take it always with a grain of salt. If you're not willing to put your name on something, then I think that there's a level of I understand there's anonymity that comes with some of this stuff, and people don't want to reveal their sources and this and that. But if you're going to attack somebody's character and you don't put your name behind it, and I understand Orlovsky was just repeating what he had heard or whatever, but if people are actually out there questioning the character of Justin Fields and they're not willing to co-sign it, it's cowardly, in my opinion. And I feel that way, not just about sports. If you're going to speak on another human being and their character and you don't co-sign it, I'm not going to pay much attention to it. If you have proof of his teammates, going on record saying, hey, he didn't really work as hard, we're over here hitting the sleds and putting extra time in the weight room and he was off, on his phone or not caring, I would probably listen to it. But when it comes from unnamed sources, I'm never going to give it the time of day. And, Brad likes one of his favorite times of year is smoke season. This is the time of year, all these rumors and all this stuff starts floating around. If you're not going to put your name behind it and you're going to throw around accusations, it's in one ear and it's out the other. I could not care less about somebody who is not going to stand by this statement saying that Justin Fields isn't a hard worker. Because, again, looking at the athlete and looking at how good he is on the football field and just how good of shape he is in, generally speaking, you're not going to achieve that level of success if you aren't hardworking. So it seems like
it's wild, bro. It's wild. And if I could hop in,
because it's just
one of the things that I scout and have scouted for the last 10 years is integrity and work ethic. When I was at the Senior Bowl, I'm watching in between plays. I'm watching how these guys' body language, how they interact with one another. For me, from a quarterback position, scouting integrity is the biggest thing you need to do. You need to be able to understand how these guys interact with their teammates. Are they leaders? Can they command a locker room? Can they command the respect? Can they hold the respect once adversity hits? I watched Justin extremely closely all throughout last season, and I saw a guy who just stood up and stepped up every single time adversity hit. He could have crumbled. He could have walked it back. I just don't feel like when I'm scouting him from a psychological standpoint, I don't see a guy who lacks work ethic. I don't see a guy who lacks that drive and intensity that you need to be a football player. Football is mostly mental, and especially from the quarterback position. Yes, you need the traits. Yes, you need the talent. That is the floor. but you need to be able to have the mental capacity to process, to motivate not only yourself, but your team. And from everything that I've seen from Justin Fields, he has that in spades. So to see people coming after his character, it's really unfortunate. Again, I don't understand where it's coming from. I'm not going to pretend like I've been in that locker room. I'm not going to pretend like I have access to these coaches or players. So I can't speak from that standpoint. I can only speak from the outside, looking in, and I don't see it. I don't understand it. I can't see anything that would point to it. You look at Justin Fields, he's credited for the reason why the Big Ten played football last year. He's a huge reason in that moving forward. That alone speaks volumes. So it's just a weird narrative surrounding Justin Fields, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe, because I know you're a Field guy, maybe we could go to this question from Raul. It's asking, who do you guys want at 3? I'll let you, start off that if you had your choice. I mean, and I'm assuming this is if what we're hearing, Lawrence and Wilson are off the board at 1 and 2. I think that would be a fair assumption at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll even take the question if Wilson was available. I still would land on Justin. Man, I keep calling him Justin Wilson. Their names keep interchanging for me.
It's because that we were talking for hours about how if you put Zach Wilson's release on Justin Fields, he would literally be the perfect quarterback prospect. So now in your mind, you're just like molding them together. That's probably what it is.
At this point, they're just molding together. But for me, I would pick Fields. And because of what I just spoke about, the off-field evaluation, I can't look at Zach Wilson and say, you know what, I saw you fight through immense adversity and saw you come out on top. That doesn't mean he's not talented athletically, giftedly, like he's not gifted or whatever. But I would say from an intangible standpoint, that's what has always led me to pick Fields and put Fields above Wilson, because of the adversity he went through, because of a lot of the stuff that he managed through last season to still come out on top, come out, dismantle Clemson. Those are the reasons, like, I like to scout that part of the quarterback position. So for me, I value that a ton. And I value him as a leader. I value him as an integrity guy. I value him as a guy who will fight through adversity. So that's half the battle. Look at the 49ers. Look at the quarterback position for the 49ers. Jimmy Garoppolo is in the middle of a discussion every single day, whether it's media, whether it's fans, whether it's players. It's a high-profile position. You need to be able to handle that scrutiny. You need to be mentally tough enough to go through that. For me, I've seen Justin Fields go through that time and time again, because this narrative started with him last year, and he answered those questions. So that, for me, speaks volumes. So that's why I'm going to have to stick with Fields.
So I've thought about this a bunch. I would have zero issue with Fields. Brad and I watched a couple Fields games last night for 3 hours, something like that. We spent a good amount of time going through some of his stuff. I've been a fan of his for quite a while. I think he's a phenomenal prospect. He's a great athlete. But after I'm really sitting here and stewing on it, you're giving up all these picks. You're taking a huge risk to do this by mortgaging 2. And again, it's not – you're mortgaging 3. I like to use the word mortgage because you're still using that third first, but you're swapping firsts this year. So you're really giving up 2 future firsts and then that extra compensatory pick you got because Robert Saleh got that. So I don't want to say it's just free, but it kind of is like playing with house money a little bit. But even so, 2 first-round picks is a big commitment. So my whole thing is that if you're going to take the big risk, swing for the fences, go for that just home run out of the park player that just it's a lot riskier, but you're going to get a better return, in my opinion, if they hit. And for me, that's ultimately going to be Trey Lance, just because I think physically he's more comparable to a guy like a Josh Allen. I wouldn't say he's quite Patrick Mahomes, because I think Patrick Mahomes is just a more natural thrower of the football. From what I saw, if you compare the college tape at Texas Tech versus Trey Lance at North Dakota State. But for me, I would not be like, it has to be Fields or Lance, in my opinion. And I'm a guy who's been outspoken about how I think Mac Jones gets a bad rep. I just think that like when you're giving up that kind of capital, you have to get some kind of variation of outcome that's going to be this elite perennial Pro Bowler player that's going to cause a headache for other teams. And while I think that there's definitely a range of outcomes where Mac Jones could end up being a guy that is a pocket passer, but he's just so good in the system. Like, one thing we have to account for, shout out OnlyShans, is this appreciation for Kyle Shanahan that we have, where this guy is so good at getting players dialed up into open space where they can not only get the ball, but then turn that into yak after, yards after the catch. So if you get a guy like a Mac Jones, if Kyle's going here and he's really just like, you know what, this guy's going to process what I want. He's going to go out there. He's going to know where I want him to go with the ball, and he's not going to leave throws on the field, which ultimately there's a lot of criticism of Jimmy Garoppolo, and I've been very outspoken with where I feel he's at as a quarterback. That's probably my biggest issue, is that when there's reads on a silver platter, they're being left on the field. And I think this season we saw it really come to a head when Kyle was throwing his clipboard and just kind of had that, he looked fed up, truthfully. That's the most plain way I can put it. So I would be okay with any of the three, but it would be Lance, Fields, Jones in that order for me. And Lance and Fields are right there. I could see, the thing is too, real quick, I want to touch on why I think that Fields or Lance would be so much better, is I think that either of those guys could come in right away. And two words that really ring with me that I will scream to the skies is rushing floor. If you have a quarterback that can run the ball, your offense's floor is immediately going to get raised up above where it would be with a quarterback that's kind of confined to the pocket and isn't going to do that. There's almost always going to be an extra defender that's job is going to be to account for that quarterback scrambling. Teams end up having to run a spy somewhere on the defensive side, and it just creates havoc where we've seen when the Niners, even in 2019, when they had that phenomenal defense last year, top 5 defense, but these mobile quarterbacks buying extra time really creates stress for a defense in a way that no matter how good defensive backs are, secondaries, no matter how strong your defensive line is, if that quarterback can buy a couple extra seconds, eventually your defense is going to start breaking down. So if the Niners could have that going for them on top of how efficient and how quick these reads are going to get open and all these things that Kyle Shanahan does as his genius play caller, you're getting a situation where your floor is already immediately raised. So while you're waiting for that ceiling to really get found with these guys developing and getting better, you already have a consistent baseline where there's not going to be this massive drop-off where they could come in week one is basically my point. And I think especially with Trey Lance and Justin Fields, they have this ability where you could tailor an offense around them where, yeah, you probably don't want your quarterback running 15 times a game. But we've seen an offense in Baltimore where they're not the greatest downfield throwing offense, but they run so efficiently and they have such a weapon running the ball with their legs at the quarterback position that they had the top offense in football the year the Niners went to the Super Bowl. Last season, they still were a playoff team and had a fairly reasonable offense for all the noise that got brought up about how it was vanilla and Greg Roman didn't adapt. It was still so stressful to defenses because they had such a special athlete at the quarterback position. So, again, rushing floor is the word that I would want people to just kind of remember, let it marinate a little bit, and think about how much better your offense is day one, even with a guy who has a learning curve just because of the ability he brings with their legs.
Well, just imagine, too, you're in the red zone, you're within the 10-yard line, and now you're worried about quarterback power. You're worried about running all kinds of motions off that, and then, wait, is it a read option? Is he going to keep it and go? So now your defensive ends are staying home, your safeties are staying home because they have to account for the quarterback. And then you're playing true 11-on-11 football, where with a quarterback like Mac Jones, you're playing 10-on-11 essentially. Like they're not accounting for Mac Jones as a guy who's going to beat them with their legs. So that gives them flexibility to do other things. But when you have the threat of a quarterback as a runner, it changes so much. It makes guys bite so much sooner on different things. It makes them have to think about multiple things at once, which, again, if you're thinking too much, you're playing slow. So that's what Kyle wants. And Kyle literally predicates his offense on getting the defense to think too much to the point where they don't know where to look. So you add that element, and it changes the offense. And I think it makes it insanely more efficient and allows them to do a lot more things.
So this is another good one, too. We've been on the quarterbacks, but they do have that pick at 43 for sure right now. We never know. Maybe they move Jimmy and they get that second from a team like New England or something like that. But for sure, they're picking at 43. So at 43, are you locking them into a DB there, or are you just taking BPA?
I'm definitely taking BPA at this point because obviously you look at free agency, you look at the guys who've returned, you look at Barrett, you look at Mosley, you bring back K1, like that's house money right there. So to me, that doesn't mean I have to go locked in cornerback round 2, but that's the thing. There are some extremely talented cornerbacks in this class, and if they are available at 2, like if Greg Newsome is somehow sitting there at 43, I am sprinting. I'm actually hyperventilating around pick 30, hoping that he falls. And if he does, I'm sprinting to the podium to get Greg Newsome, cornerback out of Northwestern. But who knows? Is that the case? Do they go early? Caleb Farley is falling like a rock because of the back procedures and what have you. So it's going to be really interesting, but I don't think you have to pigeonhole yourself into cornerback at round 2. You stick with best player available because that could be an offensive lineman. That could be a wide receiver potentially. It could be someone else. And, you know, who knows? Trayvon Morig? That's not happening. But if it does, you're running. I'm sorry. I had to bring him up. We got to talk about him eventually. But yeah, so to answer the question, I'm not locked in on cornerback. I think there's going to be even some cornerbacks available in round 3. So I'm not locked in considering the depth on the roster as it stands. You got to go BPA at that point, in my opinion.
So I actually think it's interesting because I am a BPA guy almost always when I do mocks, my just theory in general when I'm doing draft stuff. But I think that it's very interesting in this case because the Niners are in a position where I was kind of torn before. Remember, I talked to Brad before this trade, and I told him when it felt like they were going to trade. This was probably a week before they traded up, and we were talking about hypothetically what they would do if they moved up. And I was like, dude, I'd honestly be kind of bummed because it kind of ruins all these fun scenarios we've had where you're able to trade back and discuss all these options. Yeah. I was like, I'll be stoked to get the new quarterback, but it's kind of going to, I almost wish it would happen on draft day so we'd at least have the month to, sit here and have all these different scenarios play out. So ultimately what it came down to was I've talked to Jason Aponte about it as well. I was like, they have all the holes really plugged. They have good depth at a lot of important positions. Like they really are in a position where they can trade up. But the caveat to that is that a lot of these guys are on 1-year deals. So K'Wan Williams, 1-year deal. True. Jason Verrett, 1-year deal. Jaquiski Tart, 1-year deal. Especially the secondary in particular. We know Daniel Brunskill, friend of the SFNiners, friend of the show. He's not going to have that cost-controlled flexibility next year, and I think he's going to have a good enough year this year that he's probably not going to be in the price range that would make you feel comfortable with all the other holes you have to plug. Alex Mack, he's here, but he's 36. He's getting up there. I'm not saying he can't play. He's a Cal Bear. I'm going to ride for him till the end. But my point being, well, they look really good right now. It might be the time to start drafting some contingency plans for next year and the year after, especially while you're in a position where you can draft a guy who's a really good athlete that maybe needs a little bit of seasoning, needs to add a little bit to their game, need a little bit of coaching up, and you have the flexibility to do so. So for me, the target that I'm looking at 43, if they're there, is Elijah Molden. And if he's still floating there, I'm sprinting to the podium and I'm taking him because I think he could come in next year. He could replace K1 in that slot. Hopefully K1 plays so well that he ends up getting a big contract, which unfortunately I just don't see the Niners being able to really match. But hopefully he gets his payday. And they have a guy that can step immediately in and not only play that slot corner role, but I think he could play outside. I think he could shift into a too high safety look. I would leave him in single high, but you could kind of move him around, pair him next to Jimmy Ward on some plays, really get creative with the defense. I'm a big fan of Greg Ward too. So I know the question is cornerback round 2 or BPA, but I truly feel that the corner will be the best player available at that point because the only other guys I'm really looking at in that range based on all the mocks I've seen and that we've done is maybe a wide receiver, like a really big kind of alpha wide receiver. Like if Terrace Marshall falls that far, I'd be really tempted to see him, especially after seeing what Kyle Shanahan did with a more skilled player, obviously, but a guy with a similar size like Julio Jones with that big 6'3" frame, a lot of speed. It'd be very interesting, especially with, unfortunately, I know he's a fan favorite. We do have to discuss that Deebo Samuel will be due for a contract extension soon, and they're going to have some tough decisions to make. De'Ami Brown is another guy I would look at because if you added him, that's really the one thing if you look at this team that they really don't have is that just pure, not just a speed threat, because I don't want to limit him to that. He's so much more than that, but a guy who really can just blaze by people. And if you had him and Ayuk stressing the top of a defense with Kittle and Debo working underneath, it would really just be awesome to see what Kyle could do. So I think the BPA will be a corner. So I think it could end up being a corner. So I don't want this to sound like a skewed answer, but you go best player available in any situation, in my opinion. You use free agency for needs. The Niners did a phenomenal job of covering all their needs in free agency. And you always go BPA in the draft. I just think that BPA will happen to be a cornerback. And if Greg Newsome is there, you got to do it. You got to do it.
So I want to talk to you about this. I have not talked about this with you. You've been on Molden all offseason. So he just got recently elevated into Daniel Jeremiah's top 50. I respect Daniel Jeremiah's takes and how he sees things. I don't always agree with him, but I do respect him because he is an extension of the GOAT, Mike Mayock. So I do want to ask you, though, Molden, right? We look at Molden as kind of a Jimmy Ward-esque type player, someone who could play multiple roles, even come down in the slot, play safety, even if we needed to. He ran a 4.58. Do you put any stock into that? Or is that kind of a situation where you look at it and you start licking your lips a little bit because you're like, maybe that drops him to that 43 spot? Does that spin through your head?
I honestly don't know what to make of any 40 times this year because I honestly, I'm a 3-cone guy over a 40 guy. I like lateral speed more than straight line speed.
Yep.
But this year, I think it's so skewed, and I just so people understand why. Like, because I've seen a lot of people kind of be like, "Well, why would anybody, seem to think that they would make up these numbers?" If you get a guy into a better position to be drafted, he gets drafted higher. When you're going on these recruiting trips and you're going around all these, getting these high school prospects, and you can say, "I put this many players in the NFL. This guy went in the second round. This guy went in the third round." It does nothing but help the team to fabricate numbers, essentially. And what I've done, it's not completely foolproof, but whenever I see a 40 time, I add a tenth of a second to it because I think at least, a tenth of a second just to be conservative. So if you see a guy running a 4.3, I'm like, okay, what's a 4.4? If it's 4.35, it's a 4.45 in my eyes. So if he's running 4.58, that has me a little bit concerned because then I'm like, okay, like that maybe that's really 4.68, like and it's
yeah, right. Like, maybe it swings the other way.
It's tough to say.
Again, you just watch the tape because I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to look it up. Based on Brandon Ayuk's 40 time, so Brandon Ayuk clocked in a 4.5 Typically, if you're not in the 4.4s, it's almost like there's a stigma around it that like you're substantially slower if you're 4.5 or above than if you're in the 4.4s. But keep in mind, Brandon Ayuk, that final year at ASU, he clocked in, I think it was either 22 miles an hour. I don't know the exact time, but that would have ranked, his in-game speed would have ranked 4th in the NFL that year. So got to take the 40 times with a grain of salt. You've talked about this before. I absolutely agree with it 100%. In-game speed is what matters at the end of the day. So watch the tape. If he can hold up with some of the faster ones, that's all that matters because the game speed is truly what matters at the end of the day.
This is what gets me too, is that looking at it, like the one that I would really love to talk about too real quick while we're on DBs is I listened to Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks' podcast the other night, and they were talking about how Caleb Farley, because of his back issues, a lot of teams aren't even really they don't want to take the risk of taking him in the first round, even though he arguably is the corner with the highest ceiling. So I think a good comparison they made was like when Jalen Smith had the injury coming out of Notre Dame and the Cowboys snagged him at the very start of the second round, even though most teams viewed him as a first-round player. So if I'm the 49ers and let's say hypothetically Caleb Farley falls, I'm getting on the phone with whatever teams at 33, 34, 35 in that range, and I'm giving up 43, and I would give up, maybe one of those 4 or 5s if it worked out. Again, you're jumping up quite a few slots. It's still kind of early, so it would be kind of hard to say that just would work, but this is a situation where you could bring in a player like Caleb Farley, who allegedly is running in the 4.2s, has these insane ball skills and the ability when he gets beat to still make up for it. But again, was a wide receiver coming out, had to get converted to DB, and probably not only just for the injury, but needs a little bit of time in general to acclimate and get used to playing DB at the NFL level. But you're in a situation where if you could get that kind of value, the back issues work themselves out, and then he has a year to learn from a Jason Verrett and learn from a, Manuel Mosley who's been in the system, and a K1, and he's around Jimmy Ward and Tart and all these guys who've really been this tight strung unit that's shown at times they can be an elite top 5 unit in the league. Then you're in a situation where next year, if Verrett ends up playing really good and he has to go get paid, again, the Niners might not be in a position to do it, but you have an elite traits guy that could step in, that has the time where there's not the pressure on him to come out and risk hurting himself earlier than he'd need to, because he can really sit and get right. And I know it's a different sport, but it's a lot to me like when Michael Porter Jr. fell in the NBA, for anybody who watches basketball, who was the consensus was going to be the number 1 pick, had those back problems, ended up falling to Denver. They got him like end of the lottery, like 13, 14 or something like that. And again, is he a superstar now? No, but he's a serviceable player with tremendous upside, and you get him for a great value. And they didn't have to rush him because they had the depth at other areas. And I know I don't like doing cross-sport comparisons, but it's really the same kind of like situation, in my opinion, where you just bank on the value of not. And again, if you miss on it, it's like, okay, we traded up, we lost a second and a fourth, or a second and a fifth, or whatever. But you got to take these risks, and they've shown that they're willing to take risks with the quarterback trade, that they're the trade for 3. We can't call it a quarterback trade technically, but we all know what it is. But keep on it. Like it's like blackjack. Anybody who's out there and plays cards, if you're on a hot streak, press it. John Lynch, Peters, Kyle, any of them, press it. Go up, get this guy that's a great athlete. But again, if you're not comfortable doing that at 43, if Greg Newsom's there, I think Greg Newsom's phenomenal. Maybe they really like Campbell or Stokes out of Georgia. Like there are some really good corners. But to me, that's the position they need to lock down, because the 4 most important positions in football, in my opinion, are quarterback, edge, or tackle. You can flip-flop, whatever your philosophy may be, but those are kind of neck and neck, and then corner at this point. And they have the first 3 locked up. They have Trent Williams locked up. They have Bosa. They have Armstead. They have, obviously, the chance to take a quarterback at 3 here. So those are pretty much spoken for. Corners where it really does get dicey going forward. So if they could get a guy that really doesn't have that pressure to come in right away, that can learn and groom, it might end up being BPA just based on how the board falls. There's not really anybody else in that range that I'm looking at where I'm like, we really need a corner, but this guy's talent is so immense that we can't pass him. I'm just not seeing anybody really fall in that 40 to 50 range where I'm feeling like that.
Yeah, so in my head the entire time you were saying that, I was just picturing the meme of that guy who's just like, this MFer is spitting. Like, I'm like, that was music to my ears, because I'm a big Caleb Farley guy. He's my cornerback 1. Obviously, the back injury is absolutely a concern. He's not falling because of talent. He's falling because of injury. I have him as one of my top guys in this class. So if he falls to that range, maybe falls out of the first, and the 49ers have an opportunity to go up and get him, hell yes. I'm so down with that. And I think that would be really, really fun. And I see these guys in the chat right now. I see Jason. I see Kane. They're talking some offensive line. And they're going back and forth. So I think it's time to switch gears now and talk some offensive line. I think Jason had the original question in the chat, which has these guys still going.
This one, right?
There it is. Yep. Nope. That's the one. So he says, what about trying to get Landon Dickerson in one of the later rounds to learn behind Mac from when he decides to retire? This is something you've been talking about. The 49ers have plugged most of their holes. Now there's an opportunity to start getting some guys like a Caleb Farley, like a Landon Dickerson, who are going to fall due to injury, that you could let rehab, you could let come on at their own speed, not rush them into any situation. And if they're ready to play, you're good to go. We talked about Brunskill. He could be out next year based on the contract demands. Matt could be out next year depending on if he loses a step or what have you. But when we're talking about Landon Dickerson specifically, he's one of my favorite offensive linemen in this class. He's a guy that I watched a couple games of him, but when I made my way to the 2019 Alabama versus South Carolina tape, and you watch what he does at right guard to Javon Kinlaw in that game, We know Javon Kinlaw. I've talked to Daniel Brunskill. I've heard multiple other players talk about what Kinlaw will be, and that Kinlaw is coming in the NFL, and he will be a monster for the 49ers. And then you throw on that 2019 tape of Landon Dickerson against Kinlaw. Kinlaw, dude, Dickerson owned Kinlaw a couple times. And you watch other tape, Dickerson is a savage, dude. He's going to finish. He's going to pancake dudes. He's got strong hands. He's got leverage. He's got power. He can get to the second level with ease. He has the mentality and the smarts to play center, guard, even tackle. He's one of these positionless guys that we love to talk about so much. If he fell to 43, I would take him. If Quinn was available, I would take Quinn. Creed Humphrey is a good center. I think he's legitimate, but I would have him ranked third out of those three offensive linemen that we just discussed. So if Landon Dickerson's available, hell yeah. If Quinn Miners is available at 43, and that's the route the 49ers they want to go, I'm all for it. And especially in that kind of BPA realm, if they're there, those guys are legit, and they will be legitimate starters in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think that especially when you look at Quinn and Landon specifically, they both have shown a propensity to be able to not only play center but play guard and even tackle if you really were in a pinch, probably. But more likely at the next level, I think we confidently say they both could play guard at a phenomenal level. Right. So you're left in a position where, again, I would if I had my choice, I would rather have a player that's just going to lock into one position and be really good at it. But that is honestly, I think expectations are for that. Like it's a lot easier to say that than to do it. And I think that it's a situation where if you could get a guy that could be pretty good above average at guard and at center, and you have these situations like last year when Garland gets hurt, or when you have situations like guys having to miss games because we don't really know how it's going to go. We'd like to think COVID and stuff is going to not be a thing of the past by then. But if you're having guys miss games because of contact tracing and things like that, having that flexibility to be able to slot a guy in anywhere on the line, for me, it's huge. And then next year, it really gives them hypothetically, let's say they take Quinn with that pick, who we both obviously love, is a big fan of yours. You've been on him since the Senior Bowl. He not only would come in and bring the skill set, but he would bring energy, and he would bring, we talk so much about the culture and how a lot of these guys coming back to the Niners wanted to be back because of the locker room and the vibe and this, and Quinn just, when I was blessed enough, I was on a live with Brad, and Quinn just hopped on because Brad's a celebrity and he has all these, connections, and just hanging out talking to Quinn, football guy. Like that's the immediately
football guy.
Football guy. And you start to think about, you get a guy like that just lives, breathes, sleeps football, loves the sport, and you have him on a line with a guy like George Kittle and a guy like Trent Williams and some of these guys that are not only just tremendous athletes and big human beings that are going to push around defenders, but they're not doing it for the paycheck. They're doing it, obviously they want to get paid, but they're doing it because they love it. And that's, as a defender, that's going to start wearing on you when you are getting pancaked by Quinn Miners and George Kittle, and they're over there laughing about it, high-fiving in the huddle, having a good time. That shit's infected.
Put it on tape.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care how professional you are or how much money you get paid. Like when you're out there in the dirt, throwing guys around, like that shit rubs off on the guys next to you. Oh, yeah. So if you look at the scenario, well, let's say they take Quinn, they have him sit there for a year. They kind of have him learning the scheme, the zone blocking, and all that. Because I think when we talked to him, he tended to be more of a power guy.
Yeah.
Let's say that Alex Mack has a really good year and Daniel Brunskill has a really good year. The line as a whole is really solid. Brunskill's due for free agency. Another team's really needy at guard, and they're like, you know what? We're going to pay a guy. It seems like every other coach in the league is a Shanahan disciple now. There's a guy that's like, hey, this blocking system? We're going to pay Daniel Brunskill. And I was like, we just unfortunately can't do it. You slot Quinn in at right guard, then you still have Alex Mack and him, and then Mike McGlynn, Big Mike on the right. You have this line that's not going to miss a beat. Or on the alternative, let's say Alex Mack plays pretty good, has a rough year. He's 36 years old. The dude's been playing for over a decade. If he's like, you know what, like I played this 1 year, I'm feeling the aches and bruises and all that. I just don't know that I'm going to be back next season. Let's say he opts for retirement. Something happens. God forbid, maybe he doesn't play that well. You then have the option where you could just slot Quinn into that role as well. And I'm not saying I don't think he's going to play well. We like to speak about positive things on this show, but just it is in the range of outcomes. So ultimately, taking an interior lineman that could play any of the three positions on the interior, you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. Because, again, this comes back to, while they look really good on the line right now, Alex Mack is 36, not 26. If he was 26, I wouldn't even consider it. And I love Quinn Miners. He's one of my favorite prospects in the draft. But they would be pretty set if he was 10 years younger, but he's not. So, again, they're in the position where, yeah, if you see a guy on the interior that you look at and you're like, not only are you going to throw guys around on the football field, but I know you're going to come in and you're going to work your ass off and you're going to be out there demanding to get reps with a broken finger when we're telling you don't go out on the field and you're like, no, I'm going. Like, those are the guys that I would want on my football team personally. So it would be worth the investment, in my opinion. And I know that Dane Brugler, who writes for The Athletic, does a lot of really good draft stuff. Somebody asked him if they thought the Browns could get him in round 3, and he was saying, from what he's hearing, he doesn't think Quinn gets out of the second round. So I don't think it's some asinine, crazy high value if they took him there. And again, maybe there's a situation where I really like Daniel Brunskill, but I also thought Daniel Brunskill had great value as a swing tackle, and having a really good swing tackle, especially with the way the Niners have had injuries at the tackle position over the last couple of years, I would have no problem in the scenario where you start Quinn at right guard, and then you have Brunskill who's able to come into either of those tackle positions. And if we remember in 2019, they lost Joe and they lost Mike for extended stretches, and a lot of the success they had, no offense to Justin School was good too, but it was really because Brunskill came in and they really didn't miss a beat when he was in there. So yes, take the offensive, but get the guy that has the versatility to play both. And then real quick too, with Landon Dickerson, I'm sure everybody knows he has the torn ACL. It's another situation where maybe he's falling more than he would because he can't start for a team right away this year, probably just the way ACL rehab goes. And you're getting value by and I know people are kind of sick of that after Trent Baalke and all those years, but you're getting a guy that probably wouldn't be there at that spot if he was completely healthy based on how good he was. And you're getting him at that value because you can sit him for a year late into the season and be like, hey, take care of that knee, get right. We're going to have you come back in 2022. And by that point, you're going to be comfortable calling the protections, knowing the cadence, and understanding really what we're asking for from the guy that's the signal caller on our offensive line.
Absolutely. Having Quinn in there would be so much fun because when we talk to him, football guy through and through, doesn't matter. He will literally cut his finger off to be on that football field. It really doesn't matter. So he would be a great fit. And one of our favorite stories, that we learned from him when he joined us was he didn't know he was going to the Senior Bowl about a week or two beforehand. He didn't know. So I thought he was a center. I have no idea. He's coming D3. There's no tape on him that exists unless you know that coach. So I thought he was a center. He showed up to the Senior Bowl, looked like a center, smelled like a center, looked like a center to me. So we found out he was like, the coach, O-line coach, texted him the night before practice starts and says, listen, we only have Creed as our only dedicated center. We're going to throw you in at center and only play you at center. And never taking a snap before, or like never repping snaps, never being in that situation before, and you're in the Senior Bowl against D1 prospects, and you're a D3 kid who didn't play in 2020. He said, screw it, whatever it takes, and he thrived. So that would only benefit the 49ers to have a guy like that and could come in and compete for that right guard spot day one. He's that talented. So if he's available at 43, and that's where I slotted him right after the Senior Bowl. I said he's borderline first round talent. But because of positional value, he won't go in the first round. He'll probably fall to the second. And sure enough, it sounds like that's kind of where he's slotting in. Miners is different, and we like Miners, friend of the show, friend of ours. So that would be fantastic to get big old Quinn's gut down to the Bay. That would be legit.
So this is another really good question, I thought, too. Let me pull it up real quick. Sorry. It was asking how many starters do you think the 49ers need to draft? And honestly, a couple weeks ago, I probably would have had a different answer. But realistically looking at it, like, it depends what you define as a starter, because they run a lot of 22, 21 personnel. They're running a lot of looks where they really only have one, maybe two receivers on the field. And I think obviously Ayuk and Debo are more than serviceable. I would honestly say zero. Like, slot wide receiver is the only need. They brought back Mohamed Sanu, and for whatever people think that he's washed or he's not that good, He's a veteran who knows the system, still has he has some of the best footwork in the league at the position. I think he's just a little bit older and probably lost a step. But like that second tight end spot, I think Ross Dwelley is serviceable enough that I wouldn't say that you really need to replace him. He has great hands. He may not be the best, like the biggest, fastest guy, but he has great hands. Slot wide receiver, like I'm trying to think. I've been looking at the comment. I've been thinking for a couple minutes, like what really would be a need. Slot corner was a need. Safety was a need, which is why I was so on Morig for a while and why I'm still pretty high on Molden. But they brought back K1 and they brought back Kwaski, so it's kind of like there isn't like, unless you could tell me if I'm wrong, I'm not seeing a single like starter gonna get 55, 60 at least snaps a game. Like there's not a position I'm looking at on the team that they're really, unless maybe you really are that, like the people that are that fed up with Jimmy. I mean, I guess you could say quarterback and that would be like more, but I'm not ready to say that personally. Like that's not where I'm at. Right. So I would just like, they don't need to get any starters, but if they do end up getting a guy who's so good in camp that he takes a starting role, like you'd have to just look at it as a luxury. But I don't know what your thoughts are. I really can't think of any. I'm sitting here, I'm stumped.
Honestly, the only thing that really jumps to my mind would be potentially an outside linebacker. Obviously, they run a 4-3 typically scheme. So you have Fred, you have Dre. Behind him, you have Al-Shair, you have Flanagan Fowles. So you could convince me on maybe getting another outside linebacker because at one point we were playing Quan, Fred, and Dre quite a bit. So maybe that's a position they go. And there's some insane outside linebackers in this class that are damn near safeties. So honestly, I would be totally comfortable if the 49ers went after this hybrid safety outside linebacker position at around pick 43 to be a potential starter at either safety or outside linebacker. I think with what happened with Kwaski, he's probably coming back on a prove-it deal, but and he's coming back based on the compensation from his deal and all of that good stuff. So I think you could make an argument that you could bring in a rookie to compete for that safety role, and whoever wins. I'm not a big Tarvarius Moore guy. Marcel Harris, I think, is extremely serviceable. But Tart is, he's been injured, which has been part of the issues with him getting his next deal. So you could sell me on going high on safety or kind of this hybrid safety outside linebacker role. Other than that, I have enough confidence in Mosley, Verrett, and K1 to not have to move off them. From a defensive line standpoint, you could argue you could get a better interior defensive lineman than, say, a DJ Jones or a Zach Kerr. But based on how they rotate and how they use that defensive line, I'm fine with it. We've talked about the three packages, Alpha, Bravo, Omega, whatever the other one was, and how the different sub packages work. You can add another edge guy. Everything you're looking at in this class, or at least for the 49ers, feels like supplementing what you already have. Not essentially we have to fill this hole because we have no player here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good position to be in. I think that it's, again, like if you really want to start getting crazy, like I've talked before, we've done shows for anyone who might have missed it, where we've talked about this hybrid role of a half safety, half linebacker that really can come out on base downs. It's going to be really hard for teams to throw on them because of how good they are in coverage, but it's also going to be really hard for teams to just take it. Like, it's not like just throwing another safety or corner out there where teams are just going to run right at you. Zaven Collins is a guy like Jabril Cox. If he was there at 43, I would love him out of LSU. He was at North Dakota State, transferred, went to LSU. He's one of the better coverage linebackers I've seen come out in recent memory. And I think football's always going to really be about who hits the hardest, who runs the fastest, and who has the sustainability over 60 minutes. But it really is tailored to this throwing. A lot of teams are passing now. So if you can get a guy that's going to be able to fill that mold while not being a liability in the run game, but they're really going to excel in the pass game, which is what I think the Niners saw when they took Fred Warner in the third round a couple years ago. They really saw a guy that, while he wasn't a traditional linebacker, he had this kind of, role out there on the far hash where he was in no man's land. They had a vision for him. So if they have a vision for a guy like Brad and I have this vision, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, who knows, we're not the guys that are calling the shots, obviously. But I could see that, but just from a traditional standpoint, looking at the depth chart and how it's been assembled and how they played the last few years, I really don't think that there's this crazy need for being like pressed for a starter. Like there's that. I don't think you ever want to draft that way, because if you do, it's rarely going to work out in your favor if you're just taking a guy because you have a need there. And odds are you have that need because you've been bad drafting there in the first place. Like there's a lot of teams that you can look at where they have a pattern of having missed at a very specific position over and over and over again. So I'm going to say 0. Like that would honestly be my answer at this point. Maybe, and I agree with Brad, maybe if you had that, but if I had to definitively give a yes or no answer, it would probably be 0. This one really stood out to me too. I think this is a really good question. So I think unquestionably you would rather bust on Justin Fields, because you at least then you bet on the athlete. You bet on the guy 6'3", 227, runs a 4.4 40, has a cannon of an arm, is super accurate. And again, this is no disrespect to Mac Jones. Like, I'm not gonna lie, as a football fan, like I think it would be kind of cool. Like, being real, I'm not trying to make any questions about his character or this or that or make any accusations. I'm just saying strictly from experience. I don't drink anymore. I used to drink quite a bit, and I know what a bloated beer gut looks like. And that to me is what it looks like. It looks like Mac Jones likes to slam. He likes to slam beers on his off time. And hey, like I don't want to sound like I'm coming from a place of judgment. And I think it would be pretty damn cool to have a quarterback that's going around dropping dimes on the other team while he's going out on this, he's in there at halftime shotgunning beers. Like I think he's
got a 12-pack waiting for him in the locker room.
Yeah, like that'd be kind of a fun, it'd be entertaining. At the very least we could joke about it. But from a very serious standpoint, just like the athletic ability, like I would rather bust on the guy that is this phenomenal athlete. And I think that you don't want to go into that mindset in a draft where you're like, well, which one would you rather miss on? But I think that it's a very good question to be posed, because if you are taking this risk, you're going to want it. Like, I think in anything in life, if you're taking a big risk on something, you want the reward to be really big too. Otherwise, what the hell is the point of taking the giant risk? And I think that it would be very easy to justify to yourself that you could find a guy that may not be super athletic, but is like, if anybody's watched Iowa State, like I think Brock Purdy coming out next year, like I'm not seeing much from Mac Jones that Brock Purdy wouldn't provide if you wanted to wait a year. Like there's a lot of guys that you could find that really aren't these great. Like I'm a huge Kirk Cousins fan because I think that the guy is much better than people give him credit for. I know a lot of 49ers fans don't like Kirk Cousins, but Kirk Cousins was also a 4th-round draft pick. Kirk Cousins wasn't going that high because of his traits. I don't think that anybody would get, like, realistically, if Kyle really wanted a Kirk Cousins-like player, why wouldn't you just give up 1 first-round pick and get Kirk Cousins from the Vikings? I have a hard time believing Minnesota would have said no to pick 12 to get Kirk Cousins, and then they could have packaged 14 and 12 to get their own. Like it makes 0 sense to me, which is why I'm not ruling Mac Jones out, but just looking at it objectively and logically, I just don't see how you can look at him and be like, okay, let's mortgage all this future on this guy who made 17 starts. Yeah, he might be this great processor and see the field really well, but Justin Fields isn't so bad at that I'd be like, okay, well, this is what's tipping the scales in Mac Jones' favor. I think Jones is the best processor in the whole class, Trevor Lawrence included, Zach Wilson included. He's very good at going from A to B to C and quickly going through his reads. But at a certain point, you have to get some, like, the juice has to be worth the squeeze. If you're going to go up and you're going to trade all those picks, go for the athlete. I don't know what your thoughts are, Brett, but just, it has to be Fields in that situation.
So this is my thing. Kyle Shanahan has already passed on the athletically gifted quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, for Kirk Cousins, for that archetype. We have heard him asked about that multiple times, as like literally a week ago. He just talked about it and was asked about it again. Honestly, we're only Shans, right? We are big fans of Kyle Shanahan and what he does for this team, and it was really easy to see really quickly, even in when we were 0-9 in 2017, you could still tell like we're going to be okay in the future because Kyle Shanahan was leading the way. But the problem is with his past history and how it's haunted him up until this point. If Kyle Shanahan really goes and takes Mac Jones over a Trey Lance and a Justin Fields, it is literally that whole situation all over again. In my opinion, is career suicide. Because if there's anything I've learned about the NFL, is sometimes you can't outrun perception. Like in order to smash perception, you have to just literally demolish it by going either the opposite route or just being ultra successful. If Kyle Shanahan opts out for Mac Jones or opts in for Mac Jones and Justin Fields and Trey Lance go on to be Pro Bowlers, go on to be prolific quarterbacks, and you're stuck with a middling like Mac Jones, like even if Mac Jones gets you into the playoffs every year, but you realize there becomes a point when you can't get over that hump, when your run game isn't working and it isn't cooking, and we then see that drop back passing style offense that doesn't fit our personnel from offensive line standpoint, doesn't fit the scheme from that standpoint. What does Kyle do at that point? Because we're not mad at Mac Jones anymore. We're saying, damn it, Kyle, you did it again, right? And I feel like that is enough for them to not take Mac Jones, because the perception has already been built and literally hammered into Kyle Shanahan and what his QB archetype is. And if he opts for that QB archetype again after mortgaging this team's future with 3 firsts, how do you bounce back from that? How does anyone trust Kyle at that point to pick a quarterback? People already question him. People already question his ability to evaluate quarterbacks because of the Brian Hoyers, right? Because of those types of situations, trading up into the 3rd round to grab CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins, and you roll with those guys. Those are the kinds of things that when you take a perception and it turns into reality. And so if you keep that perception rolling and you take Mac Jones and Mac Jones fails, I don't know how Kyle rebounds off that. I don't know what you think about that.
So I think that's a really good point. And another thing that I think doesn't get talked about enough is if we look at Kyle, people always talk about how he had Matt Schaub and Matt Ryan and Kirk Cousins and Brian Hoyer and all these, he likes the traditional guy. He likes the robot. He likes to do this and that. But what would his dad, what would Mike want? What would Gary Kubiak want? All these guys want success. Yeah, success is a relative term. You've had, teams that made the playoffs. You've had offenses that have looked really good. But if you go back to this whole Shanahan tree and all these guys that are a part of it, who are the 2 quarterbacks that actually won Super Bowls in the system? Steve Young and John Elway. John Elway is arguably, a lot of people don't really like this opinion, but I'm very strong on. I think you could argue that John Elway, from a traits perspective, purely from just traits, best quarterback prospect of all time. Just mobile, cannon for an arm, just a prototype. Like if you were in a lab designing a quarterback, John Elway is what it would look like. And he just happened, he came into a league 40 years too early is basically what happened. And Steve Young is another guy where Steve Young in this modern NFL, you can't tell me that Steve Young wouldn't be he was an MVP back then, 30 years ago. You're telling me he wouldn't be thriving in this system now with all these open reads. You can't rip guys over the middle. You can't hit court So ultimately, I think that exactly, this Gipster had a great cut. This exactly is where I'm at too. Is he's looking for his John Elway, and that to me is where, again, I think Justin Fields is a great athlete. I think that I would not be upset at all if he was the pick. When I look at Trey Lance physically, I'm like, this guy is Josh Allen, who Kyle's been reportedly very high on. It reminds me that's my comp for him. I've seen a couple questions asking for comps. That's one I'll throw out right there. I think that Josh Allen and Trey Lance, and that's upside obviously after the year that Josh Allen just had. But I think there's a lot of similarity to it, and I think that Kyle's at the point where he wants that guy. If we go back and you look at it, John Elway was great, but it was the latter stages of his career. Mike Shanahan's going to get a lot of credit for those wins. Steve Young had a great team for a few years, but it really wasn't until that system was implemented that they really had that success. So I know a lot of people get caught up and people have this foolish logic. I think that Kyle wants more of the credit than the quarterback's going to get, which is why he takes sub-average. I've actually seen that theory floated way more often than I'd like. And I can promise you, I think the only thing that Kyle Shanahan gives a shit about is he wants to win football games, and he wants to win so many football games that he's holding this big shiny silver trophy at the end of the season in February. And if he's going to find a guy that's going to allow him to do that, he's going to get that player. So, again, you can go back and forth. When I look at Mac Jones, I don't see John Elway or Steve Young. I could see how looking at Justin Fields or Trey Lance, you look at that guy and you're like, damn, if I could get him to work on this, if I could get him to see the field a little bit better, I get him in the film room and I get him working out these little tweaks here and there with Justin Fields and that fucking elbow. That's just that's one thing. Anybody watching Justin Fields, I swear, he brings his elbow back and it comes back. Like it's irritating. It's aesthetically so unpleasing. And I swear, if he had a better release, I would be all in on him. But again, little things like that. Like if it could be coached out, then I think that there's not a scenario I'm looking at where you're passing on these guys. And I think that it's going to come down to ultimately Kyle's going to get a chance to talk to these guys one-on-one. There's a lot of stuff being reported, the pro days. I think this is a really good question too. We'll get into in a second. These guys are going to the pro days, and it's not just Kyle and John making decisions. Adam Peters is going to have a lot of say. A lot of their college scouting department's going to have a say. I do think that we'll get into this in a sec. I do think that he does value his dad's opinion a lot. Mike's been around for a very long time and knows a thing or two about picking good quarterbacks.
I think he does.
I think that ultimately, when they get these guys on these private Zoom calls, it's going to be a little weird with COVID and stuff. I understand it's not the traditional meet and greet, but really getting into, kind of behind the scenes stuff that we're not going to know about really until they're drafted and we know which way they went. But there's going to be, the processing is really important. I know Gibbs said in the comments, Beathard was pretty mobile. He had a huge arm too. He just couldn't see the field that well. He didn't have great pocket presence. And again, I think that's where, people get on Kyle for CJ Beathard, but you could see what he liked from an arm standpoint. He was mobile enough to run the boots. We saw he ran an 80-yard touchdown in that preseason game. He's run a couple option plays, but ultimately it needs between the ears really does matter. And I think that it's obviously if it was that easy where we'd know what quarterbacks are going to turn into, then you wouldn't have 50% of them, 60% of them flop. But
right.
Kyle has
you don't have your Sam Darnolds, you don't have your Josh Rosens. Those don't exist.
And those guys physically look like good. They physically could make.
They got the tools.
But it's different when you're, having live bullets coming at you and you're in pads. It's a lot different than when you're, and that's why
the entire fan base is coming after your neck and you have to go out and perform. And every time you have a bad throw or whatever, you start trending on Twitter. That's a different mentality that they have to deal with these days. But I love this question because also you have to think about it. You remember when Jimmy tore his ACL?
Yes.
It was being reported that because he couldn't practice and couldn't be involved in the same type of ways that he typically would if he was healthy, he was spending at least as it was reported, he was spending time with Mike Shanahan, going over the playbook, doing mental reps, making sure that they were staying in touch. So honestly, I think Mike Shanahan is literally like a ghost consultant for the 49ers. And obviously Kyle Shanahan, the son of Mike, knows everything he knows and obviously has taken that from his dad and then evolved it and has grown it into what it is today. I think Kyle deserves a lot of credit. I mean, Mike is definitely he's like the main root of his tree, and then it kind of branches out off of that. But Kyle is developing into like his own main root, and now he is having these new coaches spur off of him. You see what people like Aaron Rodgers can do in that system. It is quarterback friendly if you get the right quarterback, right? Because that zone run game, deadly. So it's what I played as an offensive lineman. It's super friendly for offensive linemen, and it translates into everything else in the game. So with Mike Shanahan being there, you respect the people who put you on game, right? They're the ones who put you on. So you're always at the end of the day going to want to be like, let me check what OG's saying. What does he think about this? I have my own thoughts, right? But I want to know what he thinks. So the fact that he's there, and again, it's Mike Shanahan. He's NFL royalty, legend. I think it matters. I think it does, and I think his opinion carries weight in that building.
So I think that one thing that's really important too to take note of. So this is very generalized, but Mike Shanahan has this outside zone, which, he kind of perfected it. That's kind of his baby. That's his brainchild, is this outside zone running scheme, which has been around for over 30 years. And guess what? Defenses still have a hard time stopping it. It's very impressive how so many of these, I don't want to say basic because it's easy for me to say sitting here watching tape. I'm not out there in pads executing this, but stuff on a fundamental level relative to other concepts is still fairly basic. It's so effective that over and over again, you're running what Kyle's doing is he's showing a lot of the same plays pre-snap, but they're running 4 or 5 different plays out of this same look pre-snap, and it keeps defenses on their toes. What I think is really impressive, if I'm asked to generalize in like 30 seconds or less what Kyle Shanahan's offense is, it's this Mike Shanahan outside zone, and he's peppered in a lot of what John Gruden did in Tampa with these pre-snap. Like if you go back and watch Tampa when John Gruden there, and you watch Oakland in the late 90s, early 2000s, you see a lot of these motions, these pre-snaps, these fly sweeps and stuff. And then the other would be the New England quick passing game. I think he's incorporated a lot, and he's been on record saying that he watches New England very closely and has for quite a while. And I think it's this kind of mesh of all 3 of those things really into one. And then obviously he's incorporating his own ideas, but those are kind of where he's drawing his inspiration from. So you're getting this system that's super effective, that's been, proven to work for 3 decades now. And then you're also sprinkling in all these new variations and wrinkles and stuff. And the thing about Kyle is that I think it gets lost on a lot of people is that he's not only a good play caller, he's a really good play designer. Like there's guys that can go out, that can get into a rhythm and have a whole offensive staff where they're drawing up plays and you're just, what order to call them in. Kyle's going to the drawing board and coming up with stuff that like, there's a reason the rest of the league respects this guy so much. And I know, people get on into three losing years in 4 years and, injuries happen, all these things, but just purely from an offensive mind standpoint, he's very smart. And my long way around this is that Mike Shanahan being there means a lot, because what it means is that while Kyle is this genius, I would have a hard time thinking that he's not looking up to the opinion of the man that, not only raised him, but really brought him into the football world. And no matter how smart you get and how much of a genius you may be, I have a hard time thinking that you're just casually like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to Columbus, let Kyle know what I think and he's going to disregard what I say. I think it reads into it a lot. And Javier Vega of 49ers goal, most people know Javi, he had a really nice nugget that there's only 3 people, like 3 personnel people per team allowed at each of these pro days because of COVID protocol. So that makes sense why Kyle, John, and I don't know if they had a third, were in Tuscaloosa. And then you have Peters, Scangarello, the QB coach, and then I'm so sorry I'm forgetting his name, but the director of college scouting, who's right below Peters. So you're sending the brain trust. You just have to split it in 2. And then ultimately, Kyle will get his day to go there. But Mike, as this ghost consultant that Brad's talking about, he's Mike Shanahan. He's a Super Bowl. He's a Hall of Fame coach. I think he's in the Hall of Fame. I'd have to double check, actually.
He should be if he's not.
The legendary coach. He can go in on his own and give his opinions, but he's not counting against that number where he's on the payroll member of the 49ers, So, I'm
just here to hang out because I'm a legend.
I would follow the breadcrumbs with that one. I do think there is depth to it, and I think that it was very telling that he was there in Columbus and not in Tuscaloosa watching Mac with Kyle.
And I love that he was in Ohio, there live for what we saw as one of the better pro days I've ever witnessed. Again, I talked about this before. I don't know if that's because I'm so freaking hyped already being a Justin Fields guy, 49ers being at 3 to be able to select a guy like that. I think that has a lot to do with my own personal hype. But you've heard from other people on Twitter and anonymous scouts that was a legitimate pro day by a lot of people's standards. So just glad that Mike Shanahan's there because the QB Collective, as we're speaking, I was just perusing Twitter and they're posting clips right now of Justin Fields and Kyle Shanahan working his famous bag drill. And it was funny because I remember Steph of 49ers Goldmine had posted a video of Kyle coaching this technique. And I said, and this is like at the very beginning of me being introduced to the QB Collective, and they're showing him do this bag drill. And I commented on that tweet months ago. I was like, I guarantee you Justin Fields does this drill perfectly, and they're showing him do it. He's doing a pretty damn good job. And it's just like that goes into a lot of my thinking of why Justin Fields is a fit for Kyle. I really think he is. I really, really think he is. And the QB Collective is just pouring gasoline on the fire, and I love it.
Yeah, that's one too. So like the whole thing, it's like Kyle had Justin Fields. For people that don't know, Kyle had Justin Fields at a QB camp that he's a part of. Sean McVay's been there.
LaFleur, McDaniels, Mike Shanahan is a big part of that.
They're all connected. Okay, they're in cahoots. These guys, they're all talking, right. And I think what we can look at too. I'm trying to remember. I forget if it was Daniel Jeremiah. I was listening to. I've been pouring. I'm not gonna lie. I was pouring through because I wanted to hear what like a lot of media was thinking about this Niners move up, and somebody had a really good point about how they think what happened was. Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are obviously very close with Matt LaFleur, who's the coach of the Packers. And what they were looking at is they're like, hey, we both got to a Super Bowl with Jared Goff and Jimmy Garoppolo. Hey, no, like, you know, they're serviceable quarterbacks. They're not Aaron Rodgers, okay? Aaron Rodgers is a undisputedly top 5 quarterback of all time. You can have him as high as 1, and I would have no problem with it because he's that damn good. And I think what happened was, this is not my theory. I'm trying to remember who it was so I can give them credit. But somebody on one of these pods was like, what I think happened is that Sean McVay went into Green Bay with a great defense, Jared Goff with a broken thumb, and they still hung in there with the Packers, and they had a chance to win that game still. And Kyle Shanahan beat the crap out of the Packers twice in 2019 where it wasn't even close. These games were just blowouts. And he's looking at Matt LaFleur run around and have all this fun with Aaron Rodgers where he's able to call all these plays. There's no play that's off limit in the playbook. He's making him look – he's 26 and 6 in 2 seasons as a head coach. You know, no offense to Matt LaFleur. If you put him in LA or San Francisco the last couple of years, I don't think he's winning 26 games. So ultimately what he thinks happened is that Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan were just like, you know what? I'm through with this. We have a guy that we think we know is good enough to win games with. I want the guy that I could be out there laughing and having fun and being carefree like Matt LaFleur is. Because, again, you have to think that these guys have some level of connection with one another. And, you know, I'm not saying that they're talking every day in a group chat and, you know, but they have some level, and there had to be some level of quarterback envy where they're like, damn, I'm calling all these great plays. And I have a guy that's good. I'm not saying Jared Goff or Jimmy Garoppolo are bad quarterbacks whatsoever, but Aaron Rodgers is so damn good. And seeing what that offense looks like with a quarterback who's really transcendent, I think made them motivated to go in a – like, I always thought that the 49ers were in a position where they were going to upgrade. I've been saying since October I thought that Jimmy's days were numbered, truthfully. And I think that it wasn't about his play as much as it was about wanting just more than that average level. The Rams, on the other hand, made it very clear that they were fed up with Jared Goff. Like the Niners have always handled the press conferences, and they're continuing to as, hey, we like Jimmy. We can win with Jimmy. If he's here, great. If not, you know, it'll be because some team blew us away with a great offer. The Rams, it was literally like, is Jared Goff your quarterback? And they literally were like, well, right now he is. And he was traded a week later. Like, it was very, like, body language, all that stuff. It was very clear that they were trying to move on. So I think that ultimately the 49ers got to a point where once the Rams made that move, they knew that they kind of had to throw their hat in the ring too. And I think that it was a very calculated risk. I think it was something they looked at. And I also think that it wasn't a coincidence that they were linked to Deshaun Watson for so long. And then as soon as all this legal stuff came up, they kind of just were like, you know what? Hey, we're not touching this. We're not getting involved. We're going to opt for the rookie instead. We're going to, you know, move up to 3 in this great quarterback draft. So while I think that the 49ers aren't a reactionary team, I don't think that they make moves based on what – in fact, I think it's the opposite. A lot of teams in the division are trying to catch up to what the 49ers have done. I definitely think that this whole quarterback upgrade is because – like that theory that it started watching Aaron Rodgers in the same offense take off, where Matt LaFleur isn't anywhere near the play caller that McVay and Shanahan are. There's no disrespect to Matt LaFleur. It's just how I feel subjectively. And he's watching him go to back-to-back NFC championship games and have this great team. I think that there definitely was a connection there. And then ultimately when the Rams got Stafford, the 49ers looked inward and they were like, hey, we have a great roster right now. We can win, we believe, with Jimmy right now, which I don't think they're lying whatsoever when they say that. But 3 years from now, can they? When they start to lose players because you can't keep everybody when you're drafting really good. They reached a point where they were like, you know what, we can't stand pat and have a quarterback that, not talking about talent, but just from a purely physical ability standpoint, is dead last in the division from what they're going to be able to do outside of structure. Which is why, again, I don't see how then Mac Jones is the answer there. That's what, like, I keep coming back to that. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like,
right. And then also, too, you look at who Kyle Shanahan has already had on his previous staffs before. He won an MVP with Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan hasn't done much since. And I know Kyle wants to just let his offense loose. I know he wants to wreak havoc on the NFL. I mean, you've talked about the success that we're seeing from his proteges. They're now being called the boy wonders and the boy genius. Now Kyle Shanahan's getting a little older. He's looking a little grayer. You know, he's not as young as McVay and you know, the LaFleurs and all these guys. So it's time for Papa, Big Papa Shanahan. We're not talking about Mike either. We're talking about Big Papa Kyle. Go get your guy. Go get your quarterback and show this world that thinks you're obsessed with Kirk Cousins and that archetype of quarterback, and just smash it, and then go win ships with whoever. I don't care at this point. As long as it's not Mac. I do care about that.
Yeah, and that's the thing but then ultimately, like, I'm going to be upset in the moment, but if Kyle rattles off a couple Super Bowls and Mac Jones ends up being like, another thing I'm trying to remind myself is that he did have I don't see Matt Ryan when I watch Mac Jones, to be honest. I think Matt Ryan is an indisputably better prospect coming out of Boston College.
Oh, yeah.
But he did win with Matt Ryan, who wasn't a very, athletically gifted guy. And Matt Ryan looked damn good when he had that MVP season. So if he can replicate that kind of success and they win with Matt, like, am I going to be upset? Hell no. As a fan, I literally don't care about anything other than them putting out a product that's going to net them that 6th Lombardi that has been right there. Like, I'll be 26 this year. So I know a lot of people have been watching the Niners. They saw them win before. They literally won their last Super Bowl 6 months before I was born. I've been going to games at Candlestick since I was 2.5, 3 years old, dude. Like, I went every Sunday at Candlestick, not as much at Levi's. I've gone, it unfortunately didn't work out that way. But I felt so close, and I can't tell you, like, I'm a Bay Area fan through and through, watching the Warriors win, the Giants win. It's been ecstatic. I know there's a lot of cities that don't have that same luxury, but that 49ers Super Bowl to me would be like I would be able to just coast through life for the rest of my life, just one time. That's all I ask.
Right.
So I don't care how it happens. If it's Mac Jones, if it's Davis Mills, if it's Kellen Mond, if it's Jimmy Garoppolo. Dude, if Jimmy goes out and wins the Super Bowl this year, I wouldn't care about anything. Extend him. I don't care. Like, just fucking win the Super Bowl. Like, that's all I care about. But I just don't see it being Mac Jones or Jimmy Garoppolo is what I'm saying. And I think that the Niners are very clear. And, like, I guess the question I'll pose to you, so I don't keep ranting about my own wishes for them winning the Super Bowl, is do you think that it's fair if Jimmy is kind of in a position where he's like, yeah, I don't want to sit here and just be on, like, with the hourglass running out where I'm just waiting to be yanked out for the rookie that you're clearly going to draft at 3? Like, do you think it's fair to him if he was like, you know what, like, hey, I kind of want, I'd like to get to New England. I'd like to get to Denver. I'd like to get to one of these places where I might, or to Houston maybe, where I could actually start, because he has that no trade clause this year. He kind of has a say in where, like, he could block a trade to anywhere this year. Next year, the Niners could trade him to the Calgary Stampeders and he couldn't do a damn thing about it. Like, that's the ultimate thing for me, is that, like, looking at it from that point of view, I could empathize with Jimmy Garoppolo, where he's kind of like, well, you guys have clearly made it, known that you're not committing to me going forward. You wouldn't have invested that kind of capital. It'd be different if they'd spent like a 3rd round pick on a rookie and just like, whatever, it didn't work out. You are spending that many picks on a guy that you're just bringing in to be a backup. And, like, I've seen a couple people float that around, and I understand if you're having like, a lot of people I know he's a very polarizing man, that James Richard Garoppolo. He's very polarizing. But I can promise you no team mortgages 3 first-round picks for a backup to make a competition to where you're going to just upset. Like, I've seen people be like, oh, this is going to be like what Aaron Rodgers had his MVP. Aaron Rodgers already had 2 MVPs to his name before he went off this year, and Jordan Love was the back end of the first-round pick that they spent a singular first on. They didn't mortgage 3. And that was a stupid move to begin with, first of all. But my question to you would be, do you think it's fair if you're Jimmy Garoppolo, like, are you just biting the bullet and you're like, hey, I'm going to try to do my best to stay in San Francisco? Are you starting to look at your own future where you're like, hey, I clearly don't have a future here, probably beyond 2021 at the latest. Is it time to start planning my escape plan while I have some say in where I would end up going?
So to answer that question, I would say that is absolutely 100% what's happening. And I would say that started back in Arizona. It all started when an Arizona reporter released a video of a healthy Jimmy Garoppolo practicing. I wrote an article about this back in January saying that I do not see the future of the 49ers involving Jimmy Garoppolo. And that's coming from someone who's been a fan of Jimmy Garoppolo, someone who's defended Jimmy Garoppolo up and down this website and the timeline. But when you look at what the 49ers have done, when you look at what Jimmy Garoppolo has done, they decided, whether it was as a group or as, what have you, two opposing sides, agent, quarterback, and team, they decided that it was in Jimmy's best interest to not come back and play that year. So in my opinion, when that happens, the writing's on the wall. That means that you don't believe enough in this team, or vice versa. They don't believe in you. You're not willing to go out and risk injury again, and you're starting to look at your exit plan. So when it comes to, and that's partially why I don't feel like we hear a single peep from Jimmy Garoppolo's camp, from his agent, anything leaked about what Jimmy's saying. We haven't heard Jimmy's side once. And I honestly think that goes back to Arizona. That goes back to Jimmy not playing when he could have played. And I think it was a collective decision back then that it's, all right, we're going in a different direction. We're both on the same page. With Jimmy Garoppolo, we're going to go ahead and obviously look for all options to either come in and compete or get better. And in the meantime, if we find something that works for you and works for us at the same time, let's absolutely move forward and go and do that. So now with the 49ers trading up to number 3, it's written in stone. The 49ers are grabbing a quarterback who will be the future of the franchise. You just look at the compensation that they give up. So I assume now, and as I've assumed for quite some time, Jimmy Garoppolo is just biting his lip until he finds himself on another team. I really don't believe that Jimmy Garoppolo will be on this roster in 2021. I don't believe any of the plans to draft a quarterback at 3 have anything to do with Jimmy Garoppolo, because why would it? It literally doesn't make sense. The narratives with, Trey Lance would be great because he can come in and sit behind Jimmy or whatever. That's not why you moved up to 3. You didn't move up to 3 to get a guy who can sit behind Jimmy. You moved up a guy who can change the outlook of your franchise. So with that whole situation, I honestly think Jimmy's just waiting. He's just waiting for the right opportunity. I think the 49ers are waiting for the right compensation, obviously. So when that all aligns, I expect Jimmy to get traded. I really have a hard time. And again, this is all just based on me reading how they have handled the situation. They being Jimmy Garoppolo, his agent, and this front office. I just don't see a path forward with Jimmy Garoppolo based on how this last year went out, because you talked about it. For me personally, it was a Miami game last year when I said, oh no, this is legit bad, which is why I've been scouting quarterbacks since October, since November, since then, because I felt it. I witnessed it, and it just has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where I have to assume there's a handshake deal in place that Jimmy is on. He's on to the next. He's not in these future plans. It's clear as day that this front office is positioning themselves to be able to move off Jimmy at any second. Everything they have said is perfect coach and GM speak. Nothing you can get dragged over the coals over, because in the NFL, it's not done until it's done. It doesn't matter. Like, you can go back and forth with a team about a trade and discuss moving certain players and moving off players, but it's not done until it's done. So there's no point in speaking about it until it gets there. So in my long-winded way of saying this, I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is even on this roster at the beginning of this year. I think he's moved leading up to the draft, at the draft, or right after the draft, when all the chips fall and we see who is really, really desperate for a quarterback. Then I think that's when Jimmy gets moved.
And Sam Bradford got moved for a 1st and a 4th in training camp a few years back. So if Sam Bradford's worth that, and I love Sam Bradford coming out of college, but it was pretty evident what he was at that point in the NFL. If he could fetch a 1st-round pick, like, I would never give up a first round pick for a quarterback that couldn't stay healthy. Like maybe if Jimmy was like, you look at a situation with New England, unless they trade up, like if Bill isn't comfortable giving up future capital at 15, you're getting a guy that you're familiar with, that you know knows your system, that apparently you have a great admiration for, and have tried to maintain some form of steady contact with since he's left your team. I could see the path walking. Again, I wouldn't do this, but I could see the path where maybe you can justify giving up 15. If I'm the Patriots, I'd give up my first round pick next year, assuming that it's going to be later than 15, and you get an impact player at that 15 slot this year. I just don't see Washington. I thought would have been in it for a while, but like Ryan Fitzpatrick, is he that much of a drop off from Jimmy Garoppolo? Like you may get a more consistent play out of Jimmy, but I've also seen Fitzpatrick make throws that I haven't seen Jimmy make. And you're at a point.
I think from that standpoint, you're only looking at the age at that point.
Yeah, and are you really? Maybe if Washington feels great about it, again, they could be in a really good spot. They have a really good defense. They added to that secondary. They have a phenomenal D line, and we've seen what Jimmy looks like on a team with a really good D line. So maybe they're looking at it. Denver's another one where Drew Lock just is kind of like, who the hell knows what's going on with Drew Lock, because he has all the arm talent in the world, but he just can't really do anything with it. And I would like to think that with Jerry Jeudy and his ability to get open, and Noah Fant and Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler, and all these weapons that they have there, yeah, I think Jimmy Garoppolo could have some success there. I think that they could.
He could probably beat out Drew Lock too.
I think so, 100%. And I think that this is a really good point too. Like, yes. The caveat again, they have the money to do it this year. This year they can keep Jimmy on the roster. They've already brought. Like, there's not a big hole. It's not like we're like the whole thing going around was it didn't seem like they could keep Jimmy and get Trent and Verrett and all these guys. They did it. They could keep Jimmy this year, but how comfortable are you knowing that you have $27 million sitting there just to compete, or you're sitting there like? I just have a hard time seeing them get into a camp where you have Jimmy next to Justin Fields, you have Jimmy next to Trey Lance, and Jimmy Garoppolo is doing something that one of those two guys isn't doing. And again, that's no disrespect to Jimmy Garoppolo. It's how good these guys are.
Right. And I think Jason, we did a live earlier. He made a great point about what happens if Jimmy Garoppolo stays on the roster, he starts, but gets hurt and or plays not up to the standard that we would hope. Then any hopes of trading Jimmy by the deadline or getting compensation in return goes out the window. I think the 49ers are in a perfect position right now to maximize the value in return for Jimmy. Honestly, at one point, I thought they were going to have to cut Jimmy. I didn't think anyone would pick up the phone to even pick up his contract, to trade for it, to give up compensation in return. But again, I'm reminded quickly of how desperate teams are for quarterback play. And like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, a healthy Jimmy Garoppolo can do work. If he stays healthy, might not be up to the standard that many would like to see, but he can win games, and he's proven to do that. So that's valuable in the NFL. And you can see what happens just with our offense when you have a healthy Jimmy Garoppolo and it goes to Nick Mullins or it goes to a CJ Beathard. It's just completely different. At least with Jimmy Garoppolo, you can be like, listen, we traded him for a second. We went 13-3. Look at these numbers he did from an efficiency standpoint, and we went to the Super Bowl. And yes, we can pinpoint all these different things, but at the end of the day, a Jimmy Garoppolo-led team went to the Super Bowl and almost won it. So I think you can leverage that into more compensation than what you got it for, or what you got him for. You got him for a second-round pick. We know how desperate teams are. He has put up somewhat of a decent resume when he's healthy, but that's the biggest thing, and that's what the teams will come back and say. Well, he hasn't been healthy, so we're not going to give up X, Y, and Z for him. We'll probably land second-round pick, maybe. If you can get a second round in return, I think you just have to do it, because, again, this perception, this narrative, I think everyone is tired. I'm tired running a page running an Instagram page. I'm tired. Like, I can't imagine these guys. I can't imagine being in their shoes, having to digest this narrative every single day. It's been since he's got paid. It hasn't changed since he's gotten paid. So I would have to assume they're ready to move on. And that's why they moved up to 3. So now maximize value with Jimmy Garoppolo. His value will never be higher than it is right now. So maximize it and go get something in return.
Yeah, and I agree with all those points. We went so long, we were so good, Brad and I, or anybody who watched our lives about draft stuff. We didn't touch the quarterback stuff. We talked about all kinds of. We wanted to take a break, and the Niners gave us no choice when they made this trade.
No choice.
Force on us now. But this is a really good question too. Michael Rizzo is asking, what are the pro comps for the top 5 quarterbacks? And we could just give some quick, generalized, kind of lazy comps. I don't like being held to these because we're just kind of comparing. I don't know if you want to alternate and each do one or something.
Let's start with Lawrence. I would probably assume that once we talk through this, we'll probably come with a combined comp, or if we have different comps, what have you. Because I don't have crazy comps for it. I mean, I do have some comps, but I say we just start with Lawrence, just work our way down. So do you have a comp for Lawrence?
I haven't done too much on Lawrence because I just don't think that there's any way the 49ers get him. I know prospect level, not playing style, but he's been compared to Andrew Luck and John Elway, Peyton Manning, and all these guys. But to me, he's this huge touted quarterback prospect, so it may not sound like the best comp, but he plays a lot of like Ryan Tannehill to me. Very big guy, very mobile, accurate throwing on the run. Has sneaky running ability, but isn't, game-breaking speed. But he can tuck the ball and he can run. And I'm not saying that I think that Ryan Tannehill is a ceiling, or I'm just saying the playing style reminds me a lot of it. And I'll throw this out there: Ryan Tannehill, since he's been in a good offense, which is ironically enough the same offense the Niners run, he has been, from an efficiency standpoint, a top 3 to 5 quarterback the last 2 years. And there's been stretches where he's been right behind in the same category as Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers. And I'm not saying he's as good as those two guys. I'm just saying in the right system, Ryan Tannehill is a damn good quarterback. Shout out anybody who knows Vish Kumaran. Vish knows that Vish knows a lot of things. Vish is very smart, but Vish knows how good Ryan Tannehill is, and that's one of the first things we clicked on. I think Ryan Tannehill gets a really bad rep, and I think that
he does.
You want more out of that than if you're taking the first pick, but just that's what I see. Maybe you could see something else.
Man, I'm just trying to rack my brain because he's a different guy. I think the parallels that you made to Peyton Manning, to these locked in Andrew Luck type prospects, Trevor Lawrence has been the number 1 pick since he's been a junior in high school. Same thing with the quarterback behind him, DJ. I'm not even trying to say his last name. Who's coming up at Clemson? Yeah. He'll be a future first round. He'll be a future number 1 pick, in my opinion, as long as he keeps progressing, as I think he will. But when it comes to the traits, I mean, he's different. There hasn't been anyone who's been 6'6", slender and skinny, who can move like him, and throw like him and do all the things that he does. I mean, it just feels weird saying, is Big Ben a comp? I don't even know. It just feels weird saying out loud. But it's you look at the arm strength, you look at the command of his arm, being able to make all the throws, the size. He's one of these guys who will then be comped. Other players will be comped to Lawrence. I don't really have a Lawrence comp that I can really bang the table and be this is who he is. I think Tannehill, from a size and measurable standpoint, being a former wide receiver at Texas A&M, he has, the skill set that follows, and kind of emulates what Lawrence is. But I would say that Lawrence is would probably have a better arm, a little bit better arm talent than Tannehill. So honestly, he's a hard comp. He really is a hard comp. I don't know who I'd comp Lawrence to.
I think this one, I wanted to give a shout out real quick to the Recovery 716. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you. Let's do Trey Lance next.
Hell yeah.
I think for me, like, this is super lazy generalized comp. I see a Josh Allen type player where he's big frame, has the ability to get out of the pocket and make these throws that you're really just like I remember watching Josh Allen at Wyoming. Anybody who's from Northern California, the Bay Area, I know what drew me to him was he was from Firebaugh, he's a Central Valley guy. So I'm like, hey, I like to support local athletes.
He's a former 49er fan.
Hey, he grew up with it's crazy how many of these guys grew up as kids as 49ers fans, and then none of them end up actually on the 49ers. We had Aaron Rodgers, we had Josh Allen. There was one other one that was big for Tom Brady. I can't believe I almost forgot Tom Brady. But yeah, so I see Josh Allen where it's this big frame. He's not the most accurate. Josh Allen had a lot of accuracy issues coming out, but you're banking so much on the physical potential of this guy who's not only so good on extending plays and throwing off the run, but really hard to set. You have to think too. The ability to just throw defenders off you when they're trying to like bring you down is insane. And the Bills, it's a different situation because Kyle Shanahan's such a wizard with the run game, and he's so good at dialing up these run plays. But Josh Allen has basically been the rushing attack for the Bills. They've been horrible at addressing the running back position since he's been there. And I see Trey Lance, and I like Devin a lot coming out. He looked like a little mini Reggie Bush over there at FAU. But he's had to shoulder a big load doing that. And I could see Trey Lance, while he wouldn't have to shoulder that same load, I could see them running a lot of these plays where you're going deep, you're running a lot of these verticals and deep posts. And Trey Lance is able to emulate Josh Allen and scramble for 10 or 15 yards. He's big, 6'4", 230, has these big, long strides. Josh Allen was obviously a little bit bigger, but just from the pure frame and the fact that I think he would be a little bit more of a fine-tuned project, Josh Allen to me is my just generalized like who I see when I watch him play.
I honestly think that's a really, really solid comp because a lot of the things with Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming had nothing to do with his talent. Everyone knew how strong of an arm he was. Everyone understood what he could do from a running standpoint. It was the decision-making, processing, those kinds of things were the questions with Josh Allen coming out, and they were viable questions. And you saw him struggle a little bit early, but that's what it means to land in a perfect situation like Buffalo. I've openly commended Buffalo for how they developed Josh Allen. I had a red flag on Allen because I'm always questionable of poor processing, because if processing isn't your strength and you land in a situation like the New York Jets, typically you crumble as a result. You don't typically come out on the other end. So that's why I love Buffalo and what they did with him. And I think that's a great comp. But you can also make an argument that, Lance is probably a better processor than what Josh Allen was coming out. I would say Allen had the bigger arm, but, Lance has a good arm. He has a big arm.
He's running I don't want to interrupt, but real quick, he is also running a lot of the same concepts that Kyle would have him run at the next level. So I don't think the learning curve coming in and understanding the playbook, the verbiage might be a little different and whatnot, the cadences in the huddle, the pre-snap, stuff. But he's shown an ability to hit these reads in the same, shell of the offense. Yeah, same scheme, same concepts, not the exact same play calls, but they've run a lot of the same stuff, a lot of the play action boots. They've run leak a decent amount too, which is one of Kyle's favorite plays, one of my favorite plays. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that plays off it too. Point. Where I would say
absolutely. Like if we take the last couple draft classes and we mold them together and we look at the quarterbacks, I would have Trey Lance stacked above Josh Allen as a prospect. I know I would. So with Trey Lance, he is someone that has always excited me throughout this process because you see the tools. Like you see what he can do from a physicality standpoint, but then you see him operate it within schemes that translate specifically to the 49ers, like you just mentioned. That's why I've always felt like, yes, he would benefit from some time behind someone. Who wouldn't, right? But I still think he is more pro ready than a lot of people want to give him credit for, and think he could come in and command an offense day one, because that's what his quarterback coach told me over the last couple months is that people don't understand how much North Dakota put on his plate when it comes to pre-snap and all those kinds of things. That weighs heavy on a quarterback. And then when you look at Lance, yeah, he might not have the most throws in the world. Yes, he similar production to what Jimmy Garoppolo did, but he was ultra efficient. With Allen. You saw the ugly picks. You saw like the bad throws and those kinds of things. With Allen, or I'm sorry, with Lance, he does put some bad throws on tape, but he doesn't have the ultra like scratching your head decision making. He seems to be put together pretty well. So I would actually, I think it's a great comp. But if I had to stack the two, I would put Lance at, I'm talking about prospects. I would put Lance above Josh Allen.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think the next one that would be good probably, and again, thank you to the Recovery 7.
Yeah, big time. Appreciate that.
Zach Wilson is a really fun one because Zach Wilson is probably my favorite quarterback in this class. I watch a lot of college football, dude. Like we both play Dynasty. We both are in Devy leagues where you're getting these guys. For anyone who doesn't know, you have players on your fantasy roster while they're still sophomores and juniors in college. So I watch extensive amounts of college football, and Zach Wilson wasn't on my radar at all as a top pick, first-round pick, second, maybe a late day 3 guy, day 2 guy. Right. Javi really started piloting this train early on.
He did.
And it really got me locked in on Zach Wilson, and just watching his arm and watching how just every once in a while a special arm comes along like that where it's just flick of the wrist, effortless, making these throws without just zero hesitation, zero effortless is just the word I keep coming back to when I watch him play. And I don't like throwing around comparisons lightly, but he really does. He reminds me of Aaron Rodgers, and I am a Cal Bears fan. I remember coming out, Aaron was a lot more stiff than Zach was. He had this thing where he'd hold the ball up really high everywhere he went around, but Zach has the same arm talent that I saw in Aaron Rodgers, but he has the cleaned up mechanics that it took Rodgers years in the NFL behind Brett Favre to kind of coach out of himself and get from the stiff up by shoulder pads motion to the effortlessness that we see him throw with now. And I think ultimately when you're evaluating quarterbacks, he's mobile. He's able to extend plays out of the pocket. He can scramble a little bit. I don't think he's running the way Trey Lance or Justin Fields are. But for me, the thing that I always will come back to is how good can you throw a football and how often are you going to be putting balls into tight windows? And I know people make up this whole, argument about how he played at BYU and they didn't play that much competition. And that's respectable. I can totally appreciate it. I'm here to have that discussion. I'd also argue watching BYU and watching some of these games, who did he really have to throw the ball to? Like, it's not like they were just like they were dominating a lot of these teams, but it's not like it's just because they were.
Is that Dax Miles slander?
Yeah, 100% is. And it's no offense to these guys playing, but they weren't the best athletes. And he's still fitting these balls in to the point where if you're repeatedly putting these balls in these tight windows where the DBs can't get it, I don't care what helmet or uniform the defensive back's wearing if you're consistently able to make those throws. So for me, it's Aaron Rodgers, and that would be like, again, this is like just who he reminds me of. Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback of all time, in my opinion. He's top 5, top 3, whatever you want to say. Do I think Zach Wilson will be that? Probably not. But I'm just saying that's who he reminds me of when I watch him play and the effortlessness with which he throws a football.
Right, and you're exactly right. Hoppy was leading this charge. He was the one who got me too as well to kind of key on Zach Wilson. And one of the early comps that I came away with, and I've never comped anyone to him ever, been doing this for about 10 years now, was Steve Young. And, I'm not saying that's who he's going to be, but when I look at his ability from a trait standpoint, the ability to throw effortlessly, put the ball wherever he wants to, on top of his ability to run. No one talks enough about his running ability. I think he's savage as a runner. He has some plays as a runner that are going to live rent-free in my head for the rest of my life. But I really, really see him as a special talent. And with Steve Young was one of these dual threat guys that was way before his time. But he wasn't, I think they can operate similarly. It's just something that when I watch Zach, he's different. He's different. He's seen from a talent standpoint, which we understand you need a lot more than just talent to be successful at quarterback. But from a talent standpoint, he has generational talent. He really does. Like, his arm is insane. Like, you can make a damn case that he probably has one of the most specially gifted arms entering this class since a Aaron Rodgers, a Peyton Manning, those kinds of guys. Like, he just really has a special arm. So I think he's deserving of, like, you're comparing him to Aaron Rodgers. I'm comparing him to Steve Young. I think his talent is deserving of being compared to someone of that caliber.
Yeah, I totally think that's good. And that's the thing, is it's so hard because when these guys look so special coming out, you're going to compare them to special players. And I think that the preface is always, this isn't who we're saying they're going to be, it's who they remind us of when they play. The next one obviously would be where are you at on Fields technically? Like where are you feeling,
I like my Fields comp. So I basically comp Fields as a larger Russell Wilson. So he's just a Russell Wilson with the desired size. We were watching it the other night. The way when he escapes the pocket, he's always looking to throw. And that's one of the things as a 49er fan you know very well from Russell Wilson and how he's destroyed us year in, year out, seemingly, is just with his ability to keep his eyes downfield, have the arm talent that follows. But then if nothing is available, he gets you every single time on those 3rd and 6s, 3rd and 7s, could be a 3rd and 12, and you could have him stopped everywhere, and he still finds the ability to leak out, use his legs, and extend drives. I see a lot of similarities with Fields to Russ. I also look at Russ as being a guy from a cerebral standpoint of being kind of the upper echelon of quarterback. And I've always looked at Fields as being a very cerebral guy when he plays. Can he get better? Of course. But something that I've always just kind of look at him and I'm like, you're the bigger Russ that I've been wanting, because I've been watching Russ destroy the NFC West for the better part of a decade, essentially.
Yeah, I think that is a good comp. So I posted on Twitter the other day on mine. I did lazy generalized comps, and I think that Fields, like, I see a lot of Russell Wilson in him. When I look at him physically, just from a pure, and somebody in the comments said it right before I did, right here. He looks like a smaller
Validated him.
Cam Newton was 6'5", arguably 6'6". He's listed at 6'5", but he looks closer to 6'6", 245. Fields is 6'3", 227. Built very similarly. And what really stood out to me was the feet. Watching the 3- and 5-step drops out of the shotgun that Justin Fields was taking reminded me so much of Cam Newton when he's just going back, the effortlessness with which he just strides back, the way that big frame can kind of just take off and run upfield with momentum. He reminds me a lot of Cam. Again, I think the throwing motion is way different. From the waist down, it reminds me a lot of him with the feet. Waist up, Cam had a lot more kind of torque where he was torquing, torquing his whole body forward. When he would throw, he would just kind of set his feet, and he was so strong that he could just let it rip from that standing position like that. Fields steps into his throws a bit more. So I'm not saying he's Cam Newton, but physically he reminds me a lot of Cam, the way he's built, and then the feet. And then Russell Wilson, again, I agree so much. When you watch Fields scramble out of the pocket and the way he runs, his hips are always pointed upfield. His eyes are always staying downfield. He has such good feel to slip under some of these tackles and know when the pocket's kind of collapsing around him. And the way he just kind of, tell me if I'm wrong here, but the way it reminds me is he doesn't get too far ahead of himself when he's scrambling. Like, it's not like he's just sprinting for the boundary to get out. He's buying time. And the way I watch Russell Wilson's a small guy. He's like 5'10", 5'11". He's not that, I don't say small, but he's smaller than most NFL quarterbacks.
Right.
What it reminds me of is it's almost like they're running at like 75% speed, if that makes sense. Like Russell Wilson looks to me like he's taking these big definitive steps, but it's to buy time without overselling and overexerting to the point where you're pretty much committed to scrambling out of the pocket. And that's what I see when I watch Justin Fields, is he's taking these big definitive steps with his hips pointed, down the field, his eyes locked down the field on these guys. And that's a trait. Like a lot of quarterbacks, it's pretty much, hey, the rush is coming. I'm scrambling for 7 yards, 8 yards, 10 yards, 15, whatever you can get. He does a really good job of extending the play to buy time, but while still keeping his options open to let it rip downfield. And one last kind of that I'd pepper in there too is he's kind of built like a smaller Ben Roethlisberger too. Like he has this big frame where he's hard to bring down. Like I think obviously Big Ben they call him Big Ben for a reason, much bigger guy, but in a more compact size, Fields has that same very strong frame, broad shoulders, really tough to take down one-on-one if he has some momentum coming towards you. So I don't have a single player that he reminds me of because I think there's little bit, when you see those, posts that's like Peyton Manning's brain with Tom Brady's, field vision, or whatever these things like Kaepernick's legs and Mahomes' arms. Like he's kind of like one of those where it's like a bunch of different pieces kind of pieced together. I just think that the athletic upside is really good with him. I could see a situation where, he's a viable starter for a team for a very long time at that Pro Bowl level where, again, he's going to be the best quarterback in the league. I don't think so, but could he be a top 5 to 7 quarterback? Absolutely. I have zero doubt in my mind about that. I'm really interested to hear your Mac Jones comp, though, because that's one that I've honestly struggled with.
So I've been thinking about it. I kind of feel I'm like leaning kind of like Alex Smith, if that makes sense. Like, it's not going to wow you with the arm talent, but is efficient, is going to be smart with the football, not turn the ball over, be, just kind of live in that short to intermediate area of the field with your occasional deep bomb and what have you. Alex might be a little bit more athletic coming out, but it's tough, man. I'm just trying to match his processing with his ability. Kind of feels like Alex could be appropriate. I don't know. He's a tough comp too. He really is.
So tell me what you think about this one, because I've stewed on this one, and I think that I don't want people to think that it's disparaging because I actually really liked this player, and I'm going to clarify with a better arm when I say this. He reminds me of Chad Pennington with a better arm.
Ooh. Okay, I could buy that. Good old Pennington. Ooh.
Because Chad Pennington was this is what gets me with Chad Pennington. So Chad Pennington had a fucking noodle arm, dude. When people talk about, this guy doesn't have it, Chad Pennington had a fucking noodle arm, and that is just me being as blunt as possible. Zero arm at all. But he threw a great deep ball because he was so good at his anticipatory throwing that even with that noodle arm, he would get the ball out in such a good timing rhythm that the ball would still get there. DBs couldn't make a play on it because he was so good at throwing with the anticipation beforehand. So when I watch Mac Jones, his arm doesn't blow me away at all. But I'm watching these balls he's throwing to Devontae Smith, to Jalen Waddle, some of these guys who are just phenomenal deep threats. And it's not the velocity isn't standing out. The art, Justin Fields throws this great moon ball, but he's throwing with such anticipation that even though he's not the greatest arm, he's getting the ball out in this timely manner that's getting the ball in there on time and allowing these guys to make – and it's not even that they're it's 50-50 balls where they're making plays on the ball. The ball's landing right in the breadbasket. It's hitting him in the numbers. It's hitting him on the hands in stride. And, again, it's not the greatest arm. Anybody who's watched Chad Pennington remembers the guy did not have a great arm. But if you go back and you watch it, especially when he was on the Jets, some of those years in Miami, he had this knack for just throwing a deep ball with it was almost like it didn't make sense. It defied physics that this guy's arm was so bad, but he could still throw a deep ball downfield. And I think, again, Mac has a better arm than that. And, I don't want people to go if people aren't familiar with him or don't remember him, to go look at Chad Pennington and be like, oh, no, Kyle traded 3 first-round picks for Chad Pennington. I don't think he did that at all. I'm just saying, it's that in itself is what reminds me. So when I do comps, I look for little things that remind me of different players because it's so hard to just compare player A to player B and then, they're the same person.
It's almost impossible.
So, I encourage anybody, go watch Chad Pennington throw a football and then watch on a deep ball and then watch how Mac Jones does it. And you might see where I'm getting at with this, where it's the arm isn't great, but the anticipation that he throws with is pretty damn good. And then you add in the fact that Mac Jones does have a better arm because Chad Pennington had a literal fucking noodle arm. I'm just throwing it out there.
Hey, so what do you think about Paul Third's comment?
I was
What do
going
you
to say,
think?
yeah, we really appreciate Paul Third. I think that Nick Mullins. I admittedly have to. I don't want to damage my credibility here, but I thought that Nick Mullins could operate at a serviceable level. Okay, and there were flashes of it. The Giants game. The Giants game, he looked damn good. The way he was able to come in. I'm not sitting here saying Nick Mullins is better than Jimmy G. I'm not saying he's some great quarterback. I thought that Nick Mullins, because of his processing ability, was good enough to do it. I just think that ultimately Nick Mullins is what he is. He's a backup in the NFL. He's a player that if you had as your backup quarterback, you'd feel okay. If Nick Mullins was starting a game or two and not 8 games a year, 9 games a year, you'd feel pretty good about it. And part of it is, too, I'm not going to lie, I was at that last Battle of the Bay against the Raiders, and I was right there. Too. I got very lucky. I had a buddy who, took care of tickets that night to get back for a game I took him to a few years earlier, and we were right behind the Niners bench, dude. And the way that they all, after watching, no offense to CJ Beathard and Brian Hoyer, after watching the beginning of the year, it seemed like everybody was kind of lackluster. That fucking sideline got up for Nick Mullins. And I understand when you're throwing for what he threw for like 240, 3 touchdowns, and he was pretty accurate that day. I don't remember the exact stats, but I remember watching Nick Mullins, and I was like, there's something there. Like, there's something. I think this guy has some kind of intangible value.
Dude, I was there, too. I was there. The whole stadium got behind him. The whole – and that's what BDN, that's where that came from. That night, the dude got verified mid-game on Twitter. Like, there was just so much – that led up to it with the piss poor play from everyone that had been playing up until that point. For then him to come in the last Battle of the Bay, I mean, beautiful night. That was one of the most perfect nights for football that I could ever remember. Like the orange purple sky behind the boxes, and then the 49ers coming out and dismantling Derek Carr and their starting caliber, supposed to be going to the playoffs team. With Nick Mullins, 34-3 Bay champions, like
who? People are like, who?
Yeah, exactly. And so I didn't buy the hype. I'll admit I never bought the Nick Mullins hype. I could never do it. I couldn't do it. He just looked like Nick Mullins to me. But yeah, at the end of but still, you can never take away that magical night. That night was so much fun. Like you can see the flag there. I'm sure you got it. The last Battle of the Bay flag. Love it. That was a good time.
So real quick on that, I moved to a new apartment recently, so I still have some stuff in some boxes. I have to go through it somewhere, but I had it hanging up. I wish I could pan in my old room where I was living before. I would have had it too. It would have been quite a moment between us right there. But
right.
The next one. I think that Mullins gets a bad rap, honestly, because I think Mullins physically isn't the most gifted guy, clearly, and I'm not, reinventing the wheel by saying that. Everybody with 2 eyes has noticed that. But I think that, I'm thinking back to that throw against the Bills where he hit Ayuk, and it wasn't the greatest throw. There's another deep ball that he threw. I forget who it was to. He threw another deep ball that really stood out to me. I'm trying to remember what game it was. Basically, Mullins was that he knew where to go with the ball, and he knew how to take these shots. He just didn't have the ability to do it because he was so limited physically. So it's he knew. I think that's what pissed Kyle off so much, is that he knew where he needed to go with the ball, but if you put Jimmy's arm on Nick Mullins, it's probably so. This is what cracked me up. So if you took Jimmy's release, you took Beathard's arm strength, and then Mullins' processing, and you put it all into one quarterback, it's Kirk Cousins. It's literally Kirk Cousins. Put the 3 of them together. So Kyle had these bits and pieces of this quarterback.
Bits and pieces of Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, just literally, it's and it's it kills me because he was so close to having Kirk Cousins again, but each guy was missing a different part. If they could turn into a transformer and morph into one thing, that would be the fucking ideal quarterback for Kyle Shanahan. Unfortunately, they all had something that the other was lacking. So yes. I really appreciate the donation ball. Thank you so much for that. I will just disagree slightly and say that I think that Mac Jones is more talented, but I think that you do have a great point about how Mac Jones' processing is his best strength, and Nick Mullins' processing is his best strength. If you put Mac Jones' arm on Nick Mullins, maybe the 49ers aren't looking for a quarterback right now. So
yeah. Real quick, go back up, pull up the recovery 716.
Oh, yeah.
He hit us with another one.
Oh, thank you.
He deserves, or no, not that one, the other one. He says, I also think it's kind of weird that Kyle and Lynch weren't at Lance's pro day. You see that one?
Is it back up more? Sorry, I got to go through
It's
these.
around 747.
Thank you. We really appreciate the donation. We're doing these
big time.
every Wednesday. So just for everyone watching, we're going to be doing them as of now on this Goldmine account. So if you want to like and subscribe, there's also going to be a lot of other great content coming out. I'm thrilled to be doing these with Brad. If you're on Instagram too, if you follow at the SFNiners, Brad puts out tremendous content every single day, and it's content all day as well. I'm actually very impressed at the level he's able to do that. I'm envious. I wish I could do it myself. It's very impressive how much content he does put out. So if you're on Instagram, definitely give him a follow. You're going to like that. But let me see if I can find this guy. You said 747?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, I missed it.
There it goes.
Yes. So that's a great point. So I remember when this came out that day was on 49. Anybody who's on Twitter, a lot of this conversation and buzz happens on Twitter. I know a lot of people in the comments probably are. And I remember that they said notable, I think it was like My Sports Update or one of those accounts posted like notable executives going to Trey Lance's pro day. And John Lynch wasn't there. Kyle Shanahan wasn't there. And they weren't listed. And a lot of people were like, what the hell? They're not going to watch Trey Lance? Like, what's the deal with this? And I remember very specifically at the time, I quote tweeted it or replied to a comment, and I said, all they're saying is that these are guys who are going. They didn't say the 49ers aren't there. It didn't say the 49ers don't have representation there. I would be shocked if we didn't know that the 49ers had some kind of area scout, college director, some director of college scouting, so like somebody from that front office was at Trey Lance's pro day. But the recovery makes a really, really good point. And I believe Kyle touched on it. I think he specifically mentioned his absence from Trey Lance's pro day. And he said, hey, we didn't want teams to think that we wanted to kind of play this close to the vest here and not tip our hands too much. So I think that the 49ers were at a point where, just like you're saying, the 49ers are playing chess. They handled this all really well. They did a phenomenal job of Brad and I were doing, aside from the fact we didn't really want to touch the quarterback controversy, like we knew that there was a chance that this could have happened. But we were pretty convinced that, hey, they were fine rolling at 12. They might trade back, best player available. Like, they did a really good job. Not even though it was kind of like, now we're sitting there like, well, it seemed like they were going to do, make a move for a quarterback this whole time. It didn't seem like it was going to happen like this. And I think that's a very good point, how they're now able to set up a second pro day where it's like, hey, Trey, you threw really good the first time, but guess what? A point I want to touch on real quick. I don't want to just keep talking. I want to let Brad get in here. I think for a lot of these guys, it's pretty evident that Trevor Lawrence is number one. It seems like Zach Wilson's number two. So for Justin Fields, for Trey Lance, for Mac Jones, if you're an agent representing these players, ultimately you want the most for your player, but it's a business, and you want your quarterback to go the highest possible slot because it's going to ultimately give them a higher payday on that rookie scale on the first contract, and you want them in position to hit that big, massive second contract where we're seeing guys like Jared Goff and Carson Wentz get paid over $125 million. So what's the best chance for your guy to do that? Odds are, compared to Atlanta and, I really like Joe Brady in Carolina, but no offense to them, and Denver and all these guys, Kyle Shanahan's in his own league. So you're going to do whatever it takes for your guy to be in a position where you're going to make them look really good for the 49ers. So I think that it's at a point now where when the 49ers have the second pro day with Trey Lance, normally when you have a pro day that good, you aren't really going to be motivated to go out and throw. You're like, hey, I threw again. I don't want to go out and start throwing ducks or, not looking as good. My stock's pretty high. But for Kyle Shanahan, you're going to move heaven and earth to make sure that your client's in a position to look really good for them. So what are your thoughts on that, Brad?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it was a chess move, and they kind of alluded to that. So I think that's absolutely what was going on. And again, it just plays into the hand of what I already thought about this front office and Kyle Shanahan. These dudes are gamers, and I'm talking about gaming media, gaming narratives, gaming everything. They are looking for any angle because these guys are competitive as hell in every aspect of everything, not just literally what goes on the field. They're competitive with contracts. They're competitive with making moves on all these types of things. And so if there's anything I've learned about them in this front office is they are going to play their hand to the best of their ability that benefits them. And that if that even means putting out certain narratives, putting out certain smoke screens, hell, go back to last year's draft when it was the COVID year. John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan both did tours of their in-home offices. Look, I got a TV behind me. If I'm going to go live with the 49ers, I'm very cognizant of what I'm putting on this TV. They had game tape of Alabama versus whoever, and then John Lynch had Kentucky on. So instantly they want Lynn Bowden, and they're watching Alabama's offense. That must mean Ruggs or Judy. So we're all tinfoil hats on, and it just goes to show these dudes game it every step of the way. And guess who went right before the 49ers picked, I think at number 11, Henry Ruggs to the Raiders. Oh, they were watching those videos. They saw the nuggets. They didn't want Ruggs to fall in the hands of Kyle Shanahan. So again, it just was a glimpse into how much of gamers they are in regards to narratives, and they just pick up on it. Look at what the QB collective is doing right now. They're smart. They understand what's happening. They understand how to use narratives and push narratives, and that point is exactly right. They were playing chess with that whole situation.
Thank you to D'Lo Fiasco. We really appreciate you, dude. I don't know if you were there earlier when we were talking about this, but yeah, I think that this is a great point that people really need to kind of reflect on and think about. That Mike Shanahan and again, Kyle's a genius. A lot of people around the league, from what we hear, they really respect his acumen. And I'm not saying that he just walks into the room and he assumes he's smarter than everybody else, but it's pretty natural to understand when you're operating at that level of genius. There's not very many people where you're like, well, I see this, but you think differently, so I'm going to change my whole thinking. Mike Shanahan's one of those people where I could see him going, hey, Kyle, have you noticed this? Have you seen this trait in this guy? Have you noticed this? I could tell you, he could tell them stories going back 4 decades about God. Just having that wealth of knowledge that comes with Mike Shanahan being your dad, it's immeasurable. It's priceless. And it's also a situation where Mike Shanahan can kind of just float around at these, different pro days and stuff. And it's like, hey, he's a football guy. He's Mike Shanahan. I mean,
Mike Shanahan.
We'll assume he's there to watch for Kyle and stuff. But there's not the official visit where it's getting this big buzz and publicity. I had no idea that Mike Shanahan was at NDSU, and that's probably what they wanted it, and that's the benefit that comes with it. So I think that follow the breadcrumbs, right? Follow the clues that are being left. If Mike Shanahan's at these pro days, that's a big deal. And the fact that Mike Shanahan wasn't with Kyle in Tuscaloosa, but he was with Adam Peters. And he was with Rich Scangarello, and I'm forgetting the name of the regional scout, and I apologize, or the director of college scouting. I'm forgetting his name, but that was the third person at Columbus for the pro day for Justin Fields. That tells me that the 49ers feel comfortable. I mean, obviously Kyle's going to want to see the guy in person. He's going to want to see whatever they're watching. But again, Adam Peters was the guy that flew out to Boise to watch Zach Wilson and watch him throw in person. Mike Shanahan went to Boise this last week on the Friday the trade was completed. He was there for BYU's pro day. So there's more to Kyle's ultimately the guy that's going to have to be sold on him, and John Lynch to an extent as well is going to have to buy in. And they're a tandem. They need to work together on this. But I just think that there's more outside voices that are going to go into this consultation, and Mike Shanahan is 100% one of them, and that's something that definitely to monitor. And if we start seeing him go at these second pro days they have, if we see Mike Shanahan floating around in the back, going to start, light bulbs are going to start going off, Okay, what are these guys up to? And then thank you, the Ethan Wu, is it Wow, or I don't want to butcher the pronunciation, but yes, I believe that's the director of college scouting. So thank you, Craig. But yeah, again, if you want to reiterate your thoughts on Mike Shanahan and him being around.
Yeah, no, you hit it right on the head, and we discussed it a little bit earlier, but of course, D-Lo, we appreciate your donation. So of course we will talk about it again with Mike Shanahan. You have to know that out of anyone in this world, Mike Shanahan has Kyle Shanahan's ear over anyone. It's his dad. I mean, come on. Like, Kyle knows everything, at least from a foundational standpoint, from his dad. Clearly, he's taken those concepts, he's evolved them, and become his own man, and developed his own schemes. And we were talking about how he's now Kyle is developing his own tree, stemmed off of what Mike developed. So with Mike being there, again, I had no idea he was at North Dakota, but it doesn't make headlines. It doesn't make news. Mike just cruises around. He's like, hey, I'm a football guy. Hey, Trey, nice to meet you. I just wanted to have the pleasure of meeting you, watching you live. You know, I love being involved with football. We got the QB collective over here, blah, blah, blah. You know, just shaking hands, kissing babies, doing the political thing. Like, he can literally move through these pro days like that the whole time, soaking up information to then pass on to Kyle, to their staff, which he's going to do because that's his son, and clearly they're connected. So I think it matters. I think it's huge. I really do.
Thank you again for the donation, Deal. We really appreciate it. Everybody, and we appreciate everybody watching and hanging out with us. We love doing this, honestly. You know, Brad and I, we'll stay on this even when the live ends and talk. We just love talking football. So we appreciate you guys hanging with us. I think this is a really good question because there was the rumor coming out for a couple years now that we know John Lynch is confirmed. They've said that Reuben Foster was the third player on their board, and they had him. I believe he was number 3 on their board, on their overall board. They really liked him. I love Reuben Foster coming out. I thought he was I would have not been upset at all if they took him at 3, truthfully. In that moment in 2017, if they took him at number 3,
he was good.
Whatsoever. He was damn good. He was that kind of, in college, he was the beginning of that mold of these really good, sound Mike linebackers that can play against the run while also having a propensity to guard tight ends, take on slot receivers, play that zone over the middle. Like, he looked like he was going to be that future stud holding down the middle of the defense. But the reports that came out, the rumors going around, were that he did have his off-the-field issues. He had some surgery problems and some injury, complications. And again, this is just a rumor. I'm not saying this. I'm just saying what has been floated and what has been put out there is that the Alabama coaching staff wasn't as direct and truthful to the 49ers as they may have been led. Like, they were misled about Reuben Foster with some stuff. And I don't know whether that was the off-the-field issues or whether it was the injury issues. I've heard it was a little bit of both. And the 49ers haven't touched an Alabama player since then. Realistically, the only one that I could think of that was like a clear where it might have been like, this player's really good, but we're going to pass was Minka in 2018. Yep. I think that maybe that played into that decision. Right. But it is interesting because they've been going to the well with South Carolina. No offense to South Carolina. We love Javon and we love Debo, but it's not the football factory that Alabama is. Yeah. There clearly was a much more direct tie and much more trust with Will Muschamp, who's actually no longer with South Carolina now.
Well, and they spoke to that too. They definitely talked about how Will was straight up and how that meant a lot to them in regards to his credibility based on the players that they were going to take. So to steamroll into your point, essentially, I mean, I could see that. I could see that because I'm seeing it on the flip side, how South Carolina has been kind of the opposite of what Alabama has been for this group. Obviously, with Reuben, there was some off-field. There's injury concerns with him heading into the draft, which had to do with him falling. So I try to take it with a grain of salt because at the end of the day, they took him at 31. It's not like they did take him at 3 or in the top 10 or in the top 15. They saw him free falling and decided to come up and get him. So could there be truth to that? Absolutely. But the bigger point, I think, is that matters. I think when it comes to pro college coach and or scouting department relationships, I think it really matters because if you lie about a prospect, that only makes you look bad at the end of the day. And I'm speaking from a coaching standpoint. If you're like, Mac Jones is a choir boy, is this, that, and the other thing, and then they're like, wait a second, what about his DUI, or what about this, or we've uncovered this, then that becomes a credibility issue where they're like, well, can't we trust you? Like, clearly you knew something. So I think that carries a lot of weight. Does it carry weight into the Alabama situation? Honestly, I don't know. We have Jared Maiden on our roster, who's a safety from Alabama. Granted, he was an undrafted free agent, but he's stuck around, and he's going to be competing for a special teams role next year. So, I don't know. I don't know how much the specific situation with Reuben Foster was handled, but I think the overall premise of the discussion is 100% viable.
So real quick, Con had another good question. Thoughts about removes after the first round? I know we talked a little bit about like the second round. I'll if it's okay with him, I'll piggyback a question off of that. Who's one player that just you would like gotta have on your who's projected to go after, anywhere between where the 49ers are picking at 43 and that last pick at 230? Doesn't matter what round, but who's one guy that you're zeroed out? You're like, I have to see this guy in the red and gold.
You probably know my answer. I mean, ever since I saw that belly, when I saw that gut poking at the Senior Bowl, I said, that's my guy. Like, I'm talking about off a photo, literally off a photo of Quinn Meyer's gut at the Senior Bowl. Hadn't seen a stitch of tape, no idea who he was. And I was like, oh, yeah, that boy's a baller. He's got that muscle gut. It wasn't even a flabby gut. Like, I've been around offensive linemen enough, being a former offensive lineman myself, to literally know what that means when you have your gut just hanging in the wind like that. I know what that's supreme confidence from an offensive line standpoint, and I picked that up from a photo. And sure enough, I went into the next day to watch him practice and was in love from the second I saw it. So for me, it would be Quinn, dude. I would love to see Quinn in red and gold. Like, that's my guy. What about you?
That's just powerful too. Like, you see that energy, like, and again, just a football guy. Like, it's contagious. Having him and George Kittle in the same meeting room, blocking on the same line with this, like, it would get me fired up watching these guys play. For me, it's so tough because I have so many guys, and I'm trying to be a little outside the box and think of somebody like later that I really like. But if it's really just one guy, so like. Anybody who's followed me on Twitter, they know, like, I love Rondale Moore. Like, I have this fascination just because the guy's so electric. He's so fun to watch. He's also 5'7", and I would be lying if I said that wasn't a concern that a guy that small is, he's a very good football player, but at the next, like, I have my concerns. So I love Rondale Moore, but the more that I have to have on the Niners is Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss. And if he's there at 43, I would have to make the move. He's a guy who lined up in the slot a bunch. He could win on the outside. He has the yak ability. He has phenomenal hands. Very smart player. Knows how to read the soft spots in the zones. And is just a guy that would give the 40, especially if they're making a move to a quarterback that maybe is throwing to all corners of the field and you're not just concentrating everything over the middle. He would give you the ability to run a little bit more variance with your concepts and your scheme and stuff. And then you could run out a personnel where you have this Fields or Trey Lance in a shotgun. And you have Debo out wide with Ayuk, with Elijah Moore in the slot, and George Kittle lined up in line at tight end. And all of a sudden, Kyle Shanahan, who's been, kind of, I don't say working without a full deck because they've had a great team, but all of a sudden he's being given even more of a, weapon than he's already had. Because no offense to Trent Taylor and Kendrick Bourne and some of these guys who've been playing in the slot, I think Kendrick Bourne for what they invested in him and as an undrafted free agent and lack of compensation that ever even went into him. Phenomenal player. They got their return on investment, but Elijah Moore gives you so much more potential than what Kendrick Bourne or Trent Taylor or any of these guys in the slot had given them. De'Ami Brown out of North Carolina is another guy I would love in that slot position, and I think he could line up anywhere. One other thing I will add is I think that they're not pigeonholed into getting a guy who's specifically a slot receiver because Ayuk can play in the slot, Debo can play in the slot, Kittle can play in the slot. Mostert could probably even run out there for a few snaps and stuff. Like, they have so many options, and that's what's so cool about this 49ers offense. It makes it so fun to watch, is that they're not stuck on these traditional positional molds, and you can move guys all over. So for me, it would be De'Ami Brown or Elijah Moore. If they took Rondale Moore, I'd be ecstatic for a little bit, but then I'd also kind of sit there and be like, he's doing a lot of the same stuff that Debo does, so it's kind of like redundant at that point. I don't know if you really would be like, you're getting a higher ceiling out of one of those other guys. Even like that's what my head's saying, even if my heart says Rondale Moore. That would have to be it for me, like another one of those receivers. And there's a lot of guys I really like in this class, but giving Kyle another dynamic receiver. And again, it's not like a huge need. Like they have weapons, get more. Like fuck it, why not? Double down. You have that luxury.
Oh hell yeah,
a good roster. Like the Niners need to get to a point, in my opinion, where you get into a game like they did against Kansas City, where your defense is pretty good. You're up a possession, maybe two if you're lucky. And you're not just worried about squeaking out a first down or two and draining a little bit of clock. You're going for the jugular. You're trying to put that other team out of its misery by the time halftime rolls around. And I think that they have the coach to do it. They have the infrastructure to do it. And if they nail the quarterback position, just keep throwing picks at those skill position spots, because you know that you can bring in a running back at a later round undrafted guy and they're going to produce. You don't have to really worry about addressing the running back position. Receivers, you're going to have a hard time finding good receivers in the back end of a draft or undrafted. So focus your capital on those positions, knowing you've done such a good job all around the rest of that offense.
Yeah, no, I know the guys that you love. This class is a fun class because there's a lot of guys just sprinkled all throughout. Maybe we come back and we do another episode where we're more specific about non-first round guys, and we can start really diving into those guys. But yeah, Rondale Moore, Elijah Moore, the Moore brothers, no relation, but they're both legitimately dope, and they're going to be good wide receivers in the NFL. You're the one who put me on. I knew who Rondale Moore was before, but you were the one who was banging the table for him, and then you really put me on Elijah Moore, though. And I took the time to watch the tape. He's as advertised, and I understand why you love him so much. And I wouldn't be shocked to see him somehow sneak his 5'8", 5'9" frame into the first round. Like he's different for his size. So I like him a lot. And how about this? So we're coming up on 2 hours and 20 minutes of doing the Q&A. Appreciate everyone who's hopped in here and asked us questions, giving us donations even. This is our first time doing this, so this has been fire. We appreciate the input. It's been a lot of fun. But how about this? We answer 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Of course, if you want to move your question to the top of the list, go ahead and, give us a donation. Of course, we'll throw it up there. But how about this? How does that sound? We do like 2 more questions, and then we call it a wrap on the night.
Yeah, that's good with me. There was one I wanted to get to really quick. D'Lo Fiasco asked. I think this is a very good question that does need. It's on the more serious side. I know we've been joking around and having fun. Right. Frankly, I don't want to speculate or throw out stuff. I just think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that it happened when he wasn't the starter. And I'm not. Again, I will always condemn. If you're drinking, call an Uber, call a friend, walk home. There's never an excuse to drink and drive. I'm just saying
there's no excuses anymore.
There's never an excuse. And if you're looking at it from an objective standpoint, I think it's maybe because if I recall when it happened, he was third on the depth chart behind Hurts, behind Tua. And it may not have gotten the publicity that it would have happened if it had happened this season when he was having this, like, in the Heisman talk and all these things. And again, that doesn't make it any less egregious. There's never an excuse for drinking and driving. It's something that it not only puts you at risk, but it puts other innocent people at risk. And I will never defend anybody's decision to do so. I think that the problem that I have with it is I remember Dak Prescott coming out was grilled by a lot of teams for the exact same thing. And again, we all make mistakes in life. If you get a DUI, that doesn't mean you're a horrible person, and I think you can't be capable of being good. But we all make mistakes. But I do think that there is a fundamental issue with the fact that it hasn't really been brought up all that much, especially, again, and this is just pure speculation, but especially looking at Mac and his physique, he doesn't look like somebody that's put away the beer anytime soon. And hey, you know what? If he can drink beer and he can play football and he can hire a driver and somebody's going to drive him around where he's not drinking and he's not intoxicated behind the wheel, that's for the 49ers or whoever drafts him to figure out. I'm not going to have an issue with it, but I do think that it is strange and disappointing is the word I would use, that there hasn't been. And again, I'm not saying that they should be out here assassinating his character for a mistake he made a few years ago, but you should have equal media coverage. And if you're going to drag Dak Prescott for it, you should at least bring to light, hey, Mac Jones has some skeletons in his closet too in regards to decision making.
I'll never forget when they dragged Dak, because I was a big Dak Prescott guy. I was banging the table for the 49ers to take him. I was really, really high on Dak Prescott. Thought he was going to be exactly what he was or has turned into in the NFL. But he got dragged for that DUI. And a lot of that has to do with timing. A lot of that has to do with, I think most of it had to do with timing, honestly. Him entering the draft, you know, the spotlight's already on him. Everyone's expecting him to do certain things and act a certain way. So it's really easy to pile on Dak at that point. Again, you're just like, oh, terrible decision maker, put themselves in a bad spot, not deserving of first round, even though the talent's there. It's a bad decision maker. And it's like, I think John Gruden's gotten DUI. Like, there's plenty of prominent people who've gotten DUIs in the past. But to see how much of a deal it was with Dak and how it's not even been discussed once with Mac Jones, and he probably has arguably one of the best mugshots I've ever seen. It's beautiful. It's worth a look. Go ahead, Google it. Google Mac Jones mugshot or whatever you have to look up to find it. It's beautiful. It's just, he's got like slobber coming down his face. He's like, it's just a weird situation. Is what it comes down to. Is it's not being at all pushed to the front. It's never discussed when mentioning him. Like you said, this guy, we saw him at the Senior Bowl. I saw him live. I stood literally 5 feet from this guy. He had the gut then. And you look at it now and you had months and months and months to train for the job of your life. He looks the same. Again, he's not a physical specimen by any mean, but that would prove a lot. You know, I liken it to like Brian Burns, like a guy like Brian Burns, who I had plenty of contact with during that process. He was crucified for his weight or lack thereof, and just was his biggest knock on him coming out. And he had to fight it. He had to show up to the combine at a certain weight and do certain things to prove that his frame was an X, Y, and Z. Like, it happens to other players. It's just interesting how a lot of that is skirting by Mac Jones. There's plenty of reasons that you could point to why that could be happening. But it's interesting. It's interesting when you look at the two narratives, especially Justin Fields and Mac Jones stacked right on top of each other. It's definitely an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and real quick, I saw Jeffrey asked Chip wanted Dak. I've heard that rumor as well that he did want Dak. And
Balky didn't want him.
In hindsight, yes, he would have loved to take Dak Prescott. I think the 49ers were in a position, as 49ers fans, we can all remember, there was an unfortunate couple of seasons when they just had just unacceptable. Like, any amount of arrests for a team is unacceptable. You don't want that, but it was just a beyond unacceptable amount where it seemed like every week there was a news story coming out about a guy on the team was getting arrested for something stupid around Santa Clara or somewhere in the South Bay. So I'm not saying I support the decision, but I can see why they would be bullish on taking a guy who they might have felt had those character concerns. I'm not saying that Dak Prescott has character concerns. I love Dak Prescott. I was pounding the table for him before Dallas extended him. But I can understand in that time how they may have felt that way.
But to counter that point, they took Rashard Robinson 2 picks before Dak Prescott. Rashard Robinson didn't play college football that season before. He sat out the entire year for, guess what? Off-field issues. So that was part of my thing, because being a Dak Prescott guy, and I'll never forget those like 3 picks. I'll never forget it, because that was also that pick when he took Rashard Robinson over Dak Prescott after taking Will Redmond in the second round, who had an ACL injury, and there's already the ACL stigma coming off of what we've been through. And he takes ACL prospect Will Redmond in round 2, wasn't deserving of that pick, and then comes around and takes Rashard Robinson in the 4th round when we needed a quarterback. You're telling me you're going to go into this season with Kaepernick, who at that point was clearly on his way out, Thad Lewis, Blaine Gabbert? Come on now.
There'll be no Thad Lewis slander on this show.
I loved Thad Lewis. I thought Thad Lewis was about to take us to the promised land before he tore his ACL. I have much respect for Thad Lewis. But all the rest of them at that point in time, I don't understand how you could look at the roster at that point and be like, Rashard Robinson, come on down. Screw you, Dak. You got a DUI. Well, we don't want you. That was it for me for Balky. I said, I'm done. Like at that moment, like those 3 picks stick out to me in my brain. I love the draft. That's why we're sitting here for 2.5 hours answering questions about the draft. Like I love the draft almost more than the regular season. And when I have a guy that I like sitting there ready for him to come to my team and save my team, and my dumb GM goes, nope, we're going to take Rashard freaking Robinson. Can you tell I have PTSD? Can you tell I am emotionally charged by those 3 fucking picks? They'll haunt me for the rest of my life. But yeah, damn it.
It's a fair point. No, you're right. It's a fair point. I forgot about that. So that is
no. I'm just hyphy about it because again, at that point, I almost quit. I almost quit football. I almost quit being a fan of football because I love the draft, and I was like, I'm stuck with a team that has the worst GM in football that can't get out of his own way and loves taking terrible prospects. It was a breaking point for me that will stick with me for the rest of my life.
Hey, that's
but I made it. I'm still here.
Still here like Big Mike.
Yep, still here like Big Mike. Let's go.
So I think if it's cool, I think we have time for one more. I wanted to extend. I don't know if Craig wants to ask a question. He's been riding with us for a good amount of the show. He's provided a lot of good stuff for us here in the comments. I wanted to give him the opportunity. If there's any topic or question that you had that you wanted us to wrap up with, I wanted to give you the floor to ask that first. If there's anything that you have in particular.
I kind of feel like ending out on some bulky PTSD might be a good spot. I don't really have anything else left. I'm all riled up now from my bulky memories. Yeah, I don't got much more.
Yeah, and I think just and it's no worries, Craig. So I just wanted to give you the platform. Really appreciate you watching, everybody. For giving us questions. We appreciate the donations, the interaction, the feedback. Like I said, Brad and I will sit here off camera and talk about this stuff, and just have a blast because it's what we love doing. Yeah. But it's really fun when there's people that we can get, kind of engage with and have this kind of discussion and share ideas and not just be in our own. Because otherwise, we'll just get stuck in this echo chamber where him and I are going to talk about Quinn Meyer's gut for 2.5 hours, which is fun. Like I'll do it, but there's only so much you can talk about. Okay, so real quick.
Shit.
We'll end on this if this is good with you, Brad. I think that there is no way that you can go in and be injury-free, but I think that there's something very interesting to be said about how Chris Finke was on the team for a little bit, and then Chase Claypool said that he had friends on the 49ers. He graduated the year before from Notre Dame, was teammates with Chris Finke. The 49ers were the only team that practices in pads on Thursdays. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know how
much. And he got cut right after that.
Yeah, so I don't know if that is I don't know if that's the ultimate cause or if there's a direct correlation. It would be great to have somebody. Maybe that's something to look to in the future. I do have a friend on sports or Niners Twitter that does sports medicine for a profession who's enlightened me to a couple of theories that I had. I used to think if you weighed less, it would make you more prone to injury. That's not true, apparently, according to science. Science will always overrule Jordan in his opinions. I will cede to science. So if there's some science that says that, practicing in pads that many days is going to lead to more injuries, I would get it. But it seems like it's more like soft tissue stuff, freak stuff like ACLs.
Freak.
I just think it's shitty luck, honestly, because football is a sport where you're going to have X amount of players injured every year. I think the difference is a lot of teams have depth players get injured or players that you don't really the common fan might not know about. Like football junkies will know, this is the rotational pass rusher or a swing tackle or something. The Niners are having franchise cornerstones go down left and right, and that's what fucking stings. And then you get players like George Kittle who are hurt, but they're such warriors and they're so tough and they love football so much that they're playing through torn labrums and broken bones in their ankle and all these things. So it's really hard to differentiate what is causing these, and if it's just the normal wear and tear of football and what players have this special pain tolerance to power through that and who doesn't. So my thing is I just don't think there's anything you can plan unless maybe there is some weird training regimen they're doing with the soft tissue stuff. I think is a little bit more of a pattern with sports injuries. But the Niners, it just really seems like shitty luck, honestly. I hate to put it that way. I wish I could give a more concrete, complex answer, but I just think it's bad luck.
I mean, honestly, that was a really tough situation for me personally, because obviously what my account offers me is offers me an ability to have relationships with people within the organization, whether it's employees, players, whatever. So I had gotten close to some of the staff, specifically, some of the trainers. And it was just a really tough situation because there was really no explaining it. I think part of the issue is obviously, again, 49ers come in preloaded with injury PTSD with what Trent Baalke did, with the players he drafted predisposed to be re-injured. And they were re-injured. We saw guys like Marcus Lattimore never even see the field. It was just a tough situation where we were already preloaded with this injury concern. And then when Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch took over, we just started hitting freak injuries. And to me, I was looking at the injuries. I'm like, I don't know how you can attribute these to a trainer. I don't know how you can attribute these to the staff that's like responsible for treating these guys. I played football. Like, I was injured every day. Like, that's football. You're hurt. You get rolled up on. You twist your ankle. You jam your shoulder. You get punched in the ribs. Like, every day. It just happens. That's football. That's why you play the game. That's why they get paid millions of dollars to play the game. It's tough. It's hard. It's difficult. And I'll never forget, I was standing inside the 49ers locker room, and one of the coaches came up to the guy I was with who was showing me around and was like, yeah, they just let me go. And I was like, ooh, this just got real. Like I'm standing inside the locker room in Levi's, and all this stuff back and forth with the injuries was in a major point of discussion. I always held the stance that these are freak injuries. I'm not seeing anything that you can prevent or anything that you could do that are causing these injuries. So it was really just a tough situation, dude. I just remember I'm like, being a fan, being away from it, you're like, oh, fire that guy, fire this guy, fire that guy. Oh, we don't like him. Get rid of him. Fire him. Get rid of him. Being in the locker room, watching a guy walk up with all his stuff and be like, they just let me go, man. And dude, it was wild. It changed my perspective on a lot of things. Like, it changed my perspective on how, what these guys are going through. Because again, you're looking at these injuries and they're freak. They're like, how do you stop Bosa getting rolled up on or whatever? It's just part of the game. And so to see people get affected by that, it's just really tough. And I don't really see how a group of people can be responsible for injuries. It just feels like a freak situation.
I totally agree. And I know we said that was the last one, but just real quick, I wanted to touch on this one just because it came in right at the same time. Mac Jones, I think Mac Jones had such a good year, whereas the year went on, and especially when Jalen Waddle got hurt because of how big of a weapon he was, and Mac Jones just didn't drop off. And you couple in the fact that Tua was a top 5 pick last year, and that Jones put up better numbers with a team that lost 2 first-round wide receivers and 3 if you include the second half when Waddle went down. He was always destined to be in that discussion of those top 4 to 5 guys. He was always going to probably be in the latter end because of the lack of tools. But then it's just the connection people make with Kyle Shanahan and pocket QBs that are statues that, where the processing comes before the physical ability. And then, so if you had a small little spark going and then the pro day comes out, that's the equivalent of somebody running up and pouring lighter fluid on it, because it was already this little flame was going, and then the pro day just made it worse. So I think it was inevitable. I just think that it only got worse once they went to the pro day. And once it came out and it made it seem the reports in the media made it seem like he was opting to go watch Mac Jones over Justin Fields. And I think that's what really made things, ramp up. But again, you have to remember this is also the same media cycle. People in the media, a lot of these people understand that, in their line of work, it's never going to be perfect. They're never going to get everything right. But we also have to understand as people who consume this content, they tried to force feed us Mitch Trubisky. I love Mitch Trubisky. Anybody who knows me or anything, I have this weird fascination with Mitch Trubisky where I think that he's a decent NFL quarterback that's salvageable. I don't think he's elite. He definitely wasn't worth the third overall pick. But it's kind of a joke. But aside from that, they force fed us Mitch Trubisky. They, convinced us that tried to convince us Deshaun Watson wasn't a very good quarterback or wouldn't be a good quarterback. And, all these things. They tried to sell us on Daniel Jones and Dwayne Haskins. At a certain point, it's these teams don't give a shit what the media says, but the media will push to us as fans. We don't know what's happening in these front offices and going back and forth. So I just think that it was bound to happen anyway, and it just got expedited with the fact that the media portrayed it. The media not only has all been coming out saying, well, I have it in good knowledge that Kyle Shanahan would like this guy. They probably don't have anything in good faith or good knowledge. They're just fucking – It's an industry driven by people tuning into their clicks and tuning into their stuff, which I respect. That's how they're putting food on the table. That's their job. I would not be as worried about Mac Jones as the media will maybe make it out to be. A lot of these big names in media, and you'll hear guys, like Dan Orlovsky will say, "I think that he's a great fit for Shannon's offense," which is very true. But then you also have a Marcus Spears on NFL Live with him, who's like, "Hell no!" I played this sport too, and I would, as a defensive lineman, I'd be way more worried about chasing around Justin Fields than worrying about Mac Jones and So it's going to get pushed at us for the next few weeks. Brace yourself. Yep. Just try not to read too much into it is what I'm basically trying to say.
Honestly, you nailed it. You nailed it. I don't have much to add because it's honestly just a bunch of hype at this point.
Well, we're an international show now, so I'm glad to take that question because we're expanding. So
all continents coming soon.
I think it's gonna do it for us tonight, just because I know Brad's got stuff to do. I lost track of time. I had so much fun doing this. I didn't even realize we were going for 2.5 hours, or however long it's been. I know the plan.
Well, this is what we normally do anyway, so it doesn't feel too much out of the ordinary.
Tentatively, we'll probably have another one of these Wednesdays, the night we've been shooting for. But as we get closer to the draft, depending on if it works for Brad's schedule, maybe we'll do something where we'll do a show earlier or right on the weekend, something like that, just discussing draft stuff. I know there's a lot of 49ers content out there. There's a lot of great stuff to pour through. But if you're looking for something that's more draft-centric and what the 49ers might be doing now and in the future in regards to the draft, that truly is where Brad and I kind of pride ourselves and what is our passion. So we're happy to help out any way we can. I really like doing this Q&A too. Where we're getting some content that you guys actually want to hear, and it's not just otherwise. Like I said, it'll just be us rambling about Quinn Miners and his legendary gut for 2 hours.
I could talk about that gut all day.
But so I think we're gonna wrap it up. But please like the channel, subscribe. If you're on Twitter, my @ is @splash_cousin. Brad, if you want to plug anything right now, please, platform is yours.
Yeah, that would be great. Obviously, I'm from the SFNiners. We're doing this in collaboration with the Gold Mine. We got so many buds over there at the Gold Mine. So I love that we're kind of building up this collab in this situation. Feel free to shoot over to my YouTube page at the SFNiners. You can like or follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of them. We're all over the place. But I do appreciate all of you guys hopping in. This was a lot of fun. This was the first thing that me and Jordan, I think, have done something like this together at least. So it was a lot of fun. And I think you're right, Jordan. I think at the very least, we got to bump up to 2 episodes a week or something. We got to figure out how to keep this momentum rolling so that when draft time comes, we're really cooking at that point. So again, I appreciate everyone hopping on. Follow Jordan on Twitter. Follow me across all platforms. Doesn't matter. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. I mean, look, we're 2 hours and 45 minutes in, and the only reason I got to get off is I got to go to the grocery store.
All right. I think that's going to wrap it up for us. And again, thank you to everybody who tuned in, everybody who donated, gave us comments, gave us engagement, and just hung out with us while we talked. And we hope to do this again soon. Thank you guys again so much, and hope everybody has a good night.
Peace, guys.